Okay, good morning, everyone. I think we'll have people joining throughout the next few minutes, but I'd like to get started and go through our housekeeping notes just before we get started. So today's event was something that my friend and colleague Brenda Agnew and I have talked about for quite a bit of time. Gluckstein, as a law firm, really does a lot of things in different communities. And one of the communities that we very much feel is an integral part of our firm, and one we really felt we wanted to give back to, our parents. Particularly, we do a lot of birth injury work at our firm, and we see firsthand how neurodiversity and different needs can impact families and parents in particular. I've been blown away many times seeing the resiliency and the struggles that my clients go through. And Brenda, being the open person that she is, and you'll hear from her a little bit later today, has shared, her personal experience. And for me, it was incredibly impactful. And so giving back in this way to our community is something that we feel is important. We really hope that everyone will take something from the panelists today that they can bring back to their lives and hopefully make a meaningful difference for each of you. In terms of the flow for today, so we're going to have several speakers. There are not any breaks scheduled, but our entire webinar today is going to be recorded. It will be posted on our YouTube channel, and all of the attendees will receive a link to the presentation. So if you need to take a break at any time or step away, please feel free to do so. You'll have all the content available to you after our webinar. We also have some giveaways planned. We've got gift cards as well as books from our speakers. So between each of the sessions today, we're going to have a wheel come up and we'll have winners announced throughout the day. I also wanted to let people know that this is meant to be a little bit of an interactive day, and questions are certainly encouraged. So if you want to put your question in the chat, you can do so. I believe there's an option to post it anonymously. You can also raise your hand if there's something you'd like to say, but I do encourage people to put questions in there just to make sure we can get to everyone. It's not entirely clear how much time we're going to have between each speaker, so I just want to make sure if you do have a question that you put it in the chat. That way the host will get those questions to our panelists. Okay, so on that note, I want to introduce our very first speaker. Jennifer Nunez is our first speaker, and we're really, really lucky to have Jennifer. She's a registered social worker, graduating from McMaster University and the University of Toronto's School of Social Work. And over the past 10 years, she's worked with clients assessing and treating symptoms of anxiety, trauma, self-esteem, caregiver stress, relationship issues, parenting strategies, and more within the hospitals, the education system, and community. Jennifer believes in using a flexible approach to meet the needs of each client. She's written a book, which she's going to, I assume, speak to us today a little bit about, as well as her personal journey. And Jennifer, I'd love for you to take it away and impart some of your wisdom.
Thank you very much. I should note that it is a running joke that social workers are not technologically savvy, so I'm going to share my screen, but bear with me because it may take just a hot minute to get this going. So I'm going to share my screen and try to pop my face in it at the same time. Can you see that?
We can see you. Oh, there we go. Perfect.
And the slideshow?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So thank you so much for having me. I just want to acknowledge how truly honored I am to get to do speaking engagements like this. I am a parent first and foremost to two young children. I have an 8-year-old, almost 8-year-old named Dominic and an almost 10-year-old named Loren. I've been a registered social worker since 2012. I'm a clinic director at Nourish Soul Therapy, and I did write a book called Making It to Monday, which chronicles our journey with our son after he experienced a pediatric stroke and the complexities that came with that. And I really want to say that I start my work, or I started my career feeling like social work was a vocation. I really feel called to walk alongside people while they're experiencing different ups and downs in their life's journey. And it truly is an honor to do that. Things changed and it took a deeper meaning when I myself became one of those clients, basically. And I've been engaging in my own therapy work for a long time. So the things that I'm going to be talking about today are a bit of a hybrid between personal anecdotal experience as well as professional experience. I'm sharing it because I'm hoping it's going to build connection, healing, and growth in all of us. So I'll dive in. At the time of my son's medical crisis, I went looking for something that would give me the realism and the reality check I needed, the validation of how tremendously emotional it was, the fear, the question marks, the anguish, the guilt. But I also needed something that was going to give me hope and optimism about the future, which at the time seemed like a big black hole. I couldn't find anything, at least not from the parent perspective. And so shortly after our son survived and we realized we would be on this trajectory for a long time, I decided that since we never got a medical reason why this happened to our son, if I could make meaning and share my story and share our story as a family to help others who were going through their own challenge and crisis, then perhaps it was worth it. I also happen to know that meaning making is very important in the healing process. And so that's what led me to write Making It to Monday, which came out in 2003. I'm going to share some of my personal journey and with some professionally guided strategies that hopefully others can benefit from in promoting wellness and positivity in our life. The truth is, though, I've never had a stroke and I've never had a seizure. And those are two things that I've had to learn about since 2018 firsthand. I'm an expert in caregiving and I'm an expert in mental health from my experience, but also from my training. But our trajectory is going to be unique and our story is our own. And so I don't want this to be anything of comparison. I talk about comparison a lot, and our trajectory may be different than other people's trajectories. Every single one is valid and every single one is important. So this is our windy road. On January 25th, 2018, I put my 7-month-old baby Dominic and my 2-year-old Loren to sleep, and it was as normal a night as any other. Frankly, it was boring. I washed bottles, I went to bed. Around 4:30 a.m., our son Dominic woke up crying, which wasn't totally atypical since he was teething, but we had been sleep training and typically he was a good sleeper. We assumed that it was teething pain and sort of started the regular rigmarole. I tried to coo him, I rocked him, we tried nursing. At one point, I gave him Motrin or some sort of Tempra, and he just wouldn't settle. At one point, I remember telling my husband, if he doesn't stop crying within the 2-hour mark, I'm taking him to the hospital because I vividly remembered some line on what to expect when you're expecting.com that said if a baby is fed and changed and um, not ill and they cry for over 2 hours, something could be seriously wrong. And at the hour and a half mark, Dominic settled and he went back to sleep. My husband at this point was getting ready for work, and so we had decided to let him sleep in because he had been, just so exhausted, and he put him in bed with me. Later that morning, he didn't wake up at the usual time, and after letting him sleep for about an hour, just checking in on him every 20 minutes or so, I got the sudden feeling of dread while I was sitting watching Peppa Pig, about to drink my coffee with my daughter. I decided to wake him up, and when I did, he was very different. He was lethargic. It was difficult for him to rouse. I recall his breathing pattern started to change after he woke up. And the anxious mom in me started to panic. And I tried to keep my cool because I had a 2-year-old standing around going, "What's going on, mom? What's happening?" And I called 911. We were taken to our local emergency room and we were assessed by a pediatrician within minutes. And the doctor told me it was one of three things: meningitis, seizures, or a stroke. None of those sounded good to me. And at the end of the day, he would end up being diagnosed with 2 out of 3. About an hour after we arrived at the hospital, it was confirmed that Dominic had had a major ischemic stroke in the right middle cerebral artery, and he was in critical condition. We would be transported to our to Sick Kids in Toronto, and our world exploded. There's no other way to put it. With no medical reason, my husband and I were in total shock. He was emotional and sort of frozen in that time, and I dove headfirst into crisis management mode. I had a list prepared very quickly of who to call, what to say, the things that needed to be packed, transportation that needed to be arranged for my husband because only one of us could go in the ambulance. And I desperately needed to feel some sense of control in a time and a situation where I had absolutely none. We didn't know if he was going to live or die for the first 72 hours. And thankfully, Dominic did survive. And he was left with permanent disabilities, epilepsy, and a giant question mark about the future. I, as a mother, struggled very much so with self-blame and shame. I blame myself for his stroke when we had no known cause. They had called it a medical fluke, and that just didn't sit well with my anxiety, which needed to know why, right? Anxiety loves to answer those questions. Thoughts like I should have woken him up sooner. I should have known that cry sounded different. I should have taken him to the hospital right away, not made that comment about waiting the 2 hours. Any other form of judgment you could think about was swirling around in my brain for months. I was as positive as I possibly could be with my children. I was all about protecting their energy. I spoke positively to them, and I left zero of that for myself, and frankly, for my husband either. I became even more anxious, trying to control everything in my life that I could, down to, when somebody left a light on, getting angry about it. It was a little bit ridiculous and totally unsustainable. It took a long time and a big commitment to healing for myself in order to change the narrative that I had going on and in order to start relinquishing some of that need that I had for control. I had to learn to accept that life was never going to be the same again. I had to grieve what I thought life was going to be so that I could really enjoy what life was in front of me. And there was so much good there. This was critical because it had to get me through the next chapter of our journey, which of course was 2020. About a month into the pandemic lockdown, I had been working part-time in a private practice, part-time at a school board, and so I, at the time, was working at home. My husband is an essential worker, so he was out in the community every day. And one day at lunch in April, my son, I was looking at him while he was eating his lunch, and all of a sudden it looked like he had a muscle spasm. And my son had had epilepsy since after his stroke, which is a common side effect for pediatric stroke. And I think to anybody else, it would have looked like just a little cramp. And I immediately thought, oh, that looks a little bit like a seizure to me. The seizures went from one that random day to multiple an hour within about a month. Sleep appeared to be his only reprieve, and we went right back into crisis mode on top of the global crisis that was happening. So the team at Sick Kids were diligent and they started a medication protocol. They changed the meds he was on, added more, trialed new ones, and nothing was working. They called it an epileptic explosion. By about June, July, we were told that he was being considered for surgical intervention, and the only surgery that would be appropriate for Dominic was a functional hemispherectomy. And by that summer, also, Dominic's development had stalled. He was exhausted. He was bruised from falling off the couch or having a seizure mid-step. He was irritable. Honestly, so was I. I mean, I couldn't be more than an arm's length away from him unless somebody else was. I felt I needed to be ready to catch him if he had a seizure and fell. I felt I was neglecting my daughter, who at the time was just shy of 5. And in comparison to my son, I absolutely was. Work became an afterthought. I had to give up my career a second time. I did the first time after his stroke for several months. And I felt I was lost again in the sea of question marks of what would happen all over again. Once we were confirmed that Dominic was a candidate for a hemispherectomy, I decided I needed to prepare for that. Dominic would have to live the rest of his life with only half a functioning brain. And it was a terrifying decision as parents, and yet didn't really feel like a decision at all, given that his quality of life had been so transformed in such a short period of time by these pervasive seizures. And the chance of success from this surgery was quite high, given the damage that he had on that side of the brain. So during this time, in preparation for surgery, I decided to do things a little differently. I had the luxury of knowing what was coming, and so I set myself up with a therapist. I started to engage in regular exercise as a form of stress relief when my husband would get home from work. And I really tried to mentally prepare for what was coming. I would have to live in a hospital again. I would have to leave my daughter and my husband again. This time there would be no visitors allowed because of the pandemic. I'd have to shower in communal showers at Bloorview when we went to rehab. It was a luxury, and yet also I just didn't know if I had gas in the tank. And so the benefit of knowing what was coming felt like a gift. And yet, I had familiarity with these places, and yet I knew I really, really didn't want to go. The time period was very taxing on me emotionally, and it was all on my family, and it was also one of tremendous growth and learning. I recognize that through challenge and crisis, that's where the opportunity for growth and change is. And we talk about this in social work, a therapeutic crisis, and sometimes something has to happen to be that catalyst to propel us into positive growth and change. I'll say this again, and if you take nothing from today, please remember that there is no better classroom than a crisis, and there is no better teacher than trauma. We just have to be open and willing to learn. And I share this story because it was a time that I really never felt more alone and isolated. And I knew in my core I couldn't possibly be alone. And yet I felt it. And so I felt helpless because I wanted to make it better and I wasn't able to. I blamed myself for not doing enough or being enough for either of my children or my husband, and later on for myself. I wanted to learn as much as I could about my child's condition so that I could provide them with the best quality of life, and yet I felt totally overwhelmed about the complexities of neurology and the uniqueness of epilepsy. And I learned a whole lot. And so in November of 2020, Dominic had his hemispherectomy and it went well. And it was the longest 8 hours of my life, 7 hours, sorry, of my life. And he's been doing fairly well since then with a few hiccups, but we'll get into that a little later. And I wanted to share what I learned as a parent and caregiver through this time. Grief is a process. And I knew this, but I don't think I really understood that grief doesn't go away, right? We grow around it. And that was something that I had to learn firsthand because no book is ever going to teach us that. I had to let go of what I thought life was going to be so that I could accept, appreciate, and love the life that I had and what it is. And grief isn't just for when someone passes away, it's also an important process for parents and caregivers to grieve what they thought would be. And I always use the example of when we have kids, we have this idea of what they can do and achieve and their potential. And sometimes even before they're born, we have these visions of their wedding day, perhaps, or graduation. And it becomes a little bit like a plan without us realizing it. And the moment life takes a left turn, or in our case, perhaps explodes a little bit, we get scared. We want to go back to the plan, and yet the plan never really existed. It was just in our thoughts, and our thoughts are not always facts. So I had to honor that sometimes life is unfair, and I had to validate that feeling. Sometimes stuff happens and it sucks, and it's never going to be something that I'm happy about. But we need to validate and make space for those emotions so that both grief and gratitude can exist at the same time. Both anxiety and peace can exist at the same time. So we need to validate our emotions, but also show ourselves and others around us some compassion. It makes sense to feel tired, fearful, or frustrated. And once we acknowledge that validity, then it's our job to choose to move forward one step at a time. Some days that step is not that hard to take, and others, it's an absolute battle just to get to bedtime. And it's really about the effort and not the output. I also learned that not everybody learns and grows and heals at the same speed. And this was you know, ever clear to me, not just in my work with clients and parents, but also in my own marriage. My husband and I coped from the get-go very, very differently. I seem to be a delayed processor, having gone into that crisis doer mode since I had perhaps the background of being in crisis management for some years. And so months later, when we laugh now, looking back, saying my husband's tears had dried and I just started. And we had to honor that we were in different places and respect that we were going to go through this in our own unique ways. And we may not agree with it, but we had to find a way to cope with each other and support each other in a way that made sense. I also learned the incredible importance of language, which I'm going to have my own slide on later. But the period of time in life, during this 3 years or so, taught me the need and the benefit of letting things go. Something I'm still working on, if I'm being totally honest, because I still do have anxiety and I like to have predictability, as I think we all do when we live with so much unpredictability in our world. I needed to learn to accept that many things happen that I cannot change, and validating that this is true was hard and uncomfortable. And sometimes it still is hard and uncomfortable, and that's okay because I can do hard things. And I believe it's Glendon Doyle that says pick your hard, and that sort of, or I think she says we can do hard things, but we do have to pick our hard. It's important that we trust that we have the tools that we can make it through, make decisions when we need to. We can make plans. It's great to have goals. It's great to have plans. It's also okay if those plans get changed. We can pivot and we can figure it out. I learned through this experience combined with my professional background that it's not really about regaining control, which I thought it was for a long time, and getting back on track. It's just about recognizing that the path was never there. We're just creating it as we go, one step at a time. And we have to trust that we have the skills and the tools to manage when something unexpected happens, because it will. And it is scary when it does. It's scary not to know what's coming in the future. It still is for me sometimes. And we have to grieve that. It's like a wave of trauma or a wave of grief. Those waves come and they go. And I always love to, visualize the ocean. I say sometimes the waves are small and smooth, other times it's like a monsoon or a tidal wave, but the water will always go back out into the ocean. And that's the same with those feelings. Even when they feel all consuming, at some point it will get better. Guilt and shame, I wanted to have its own slide, because not only is it something that's been pervasive in my work, it's also been pervasive in my life as a parent. And so they often get confused with each other. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time separating them out. Parents and caregivers often feel a sense of guilt in some way, shape, or form, regardless of the status of their parenting or the nature of their parenting. And this is natural. It can become exacerbated when our children live with complex needs and medical needs. So the main reasons I hear guilt from parents are: I lost my temper, I'm not doing enough for my child, sometimes even I'm doing too much for my child, I'm not teaching them anything, I'm spending too much time at work, I'm not providing financially because I can't work. You name it, any end of the spectrum we can feel guilt about. I've also heard in the medical parenting community guilt that they don't feel that they're engaging enough in therapy, or they're engaging too much in therapy, or they're not advocating hard enough, or maybe they're being overzealous and coming on too strong. They're too tired and they feel guilty about that fatigue, wanting to do more. They're not engaging enough. Like I said, anything you can think of, we're probably feeling guilty about it. The difference between guilt and shame, though, is that guilt is really about an action or an inaction. It's extrinsic. It's not who we are. It's something we did or didn't do that we feel remorse for. And if we hold on to guilt and shame for too long, or it becomes too pervasive, it can have poor mental health outcomes like poor self-esteem, anxiety, depression, etc. But it's not who we are. Shame, on the other hand, is directly linked with low self-esteem, low sense of self-worth. It has to do with making mistakes or wrongdoing, but it's who I am. So if I'm not engaging my child in enough therapy, or I'm not playing enough with my kids and making home cooked meals every day, I'm a bad mother, versus I didn't have enough time today and that sucked. And so you can see where this is, much more strongly linked with poor mental health outcomes, but it's very intrinsic. It becomes who we think we are. It's also considered one of the lower levels of energy waves. So when we talk about survival, shame and guilt is sort of not in a place where we can grow. And that's something I talk about in my practice quite a bit. We also, as parents, tend to minimize our experience of trauma in some cases, often thinking about how it's not us who necessarily are the patient, even though in social work we often use a family systems perspective. And so the reality is, what happens to one happens to all, and we're all impacted by the trauma that we experience. I also see a lot of guilt when people use comparison, and I will mention more about comparison later, because it is truly the thief of joy. I did not coin that phrase, it's very famous, but comparing ourselves to others does no good, because we tend to do one of two things. We compare ourselves to people that have it much easier, or seemingly much easier, much better, and we feel victimized and marginalized and not good enough, and it's unfair. Or we do the flip side and we compare to people who have it much worse, and that minimizes our experience. And we say things like, I shouldn't complain, and who am I to be upset about this? I have so much to be grateful for. Shouldn't I just feel lucky? And so either way, we're invalidating, and either way, we're actually keeping ourselves in that guilt and shame cycle. And so we really want to be cautious about whether we're doing that and how can we start to break that cycle. And I can give you a hint, which I'll talk about later. The first step is just acknowledging it and forgiving it. But being guilty, or guilting yourself or shaming yourself for feeling guilty, not going to help. So how do we heal it? So like I said, step one is to really become aware of the amount of time we spend in guilt and shame. And a lot of times we're on autopilot, so we really don't notice unless we start to think about it from a neutral perspective, and just to be aware, like, how many times in a day am I coming down hard on myself? Or how many times in my day am I thinking about myself in negative context? And so can we just be aware of that? And we want to, I'd even encourage you to take a second right now and think about how many times you said, I should have, or I shouldn't have, in the last couple of days. And if you haven't said it, gold star. I know I'm guilty of doing it. And really that should is covert judgment, right? I should means I didn't do it another way, which would have been better. Step 2, we need to get honest with ourselves. We need to hold ourselves accountable and give validation to the emotion that we're feeling. There's nothing wrong with feeling guilt and there's nothing wrong with feeling shame. But when we hold frustration about it, when we get mad at ourselves for it, or we perpetuate that cycle, it makes it stronger and keeps us stuck in that cycle. This the validation also allows us to learn from our mistakes and see our missteps as opportunities for learning. So I've started to change my language. And again, this is touching on the language being powerful, in that it's not success or failure, it's success or learning. And when we think about times in our life that we've learned a lot, it's not when things were easy, it's when things were hard. And so oftentimes when things weren't going our way, when we didn't know how we were going to manage, this is when we learn the most about ourselves. So step 3 is practicing self-validation and forgiveness. I will say this until the cows come home, if that's the saying. It is so, so important and something we need to practice a little bit better, I think, in the Western world in general. But self-forgiveness is a huge piece. And oftentimes it helps us when we start to forgive ourselves and show compassion to ourselves, we sometimes get better at forgiving others or holding boundaries. And I can talk about that another time. Our kids are watching us. And children do not learn because we tell them something. They learn from experience, they learn from connection. So when we invest in our own mental health, when we invest in our own self-care, when we invest in our happiness, they're reaping the benefits of that. And they're also seeing that they're worthy of investing in their own health, in their own happiness, in their own mental well-being as they get older. And that to me is really the reason why I do what I do. The reality is, though, trauma can be sneaky and it can show up when you least expect it. And so it's important to recognize that we don't get to control when trauma shows up, and it can be very, very inconvenient. So I'm going to share a bit of a personal story here where when Dominic had his stroke on January the 26th, while the paramedics were assessing him in the home, I was having what felt at the time like an out-of-body experience. It felt like no time at all was passing. I was watching myself assess them. I'm standing in the room. I hadn't showered in 3 days. I'm wearing the nursing, a nursing tank top and sweatpants, probably the mom uniform that I had since I was on maternity leave at the time. And at one point, a paramedic looked at me and said, "Ma'am, have you been out of the country recently?" And I said, "No, why?" And he pointed to the side of the room and there was a suitcase sitting there. And the suitcase was there because 9 days after Dominic had his stroke, our family was planning, prior to his stroke, planning to go on a family vacation with some of my cousins and their kids. And I never forgot that connection somehow that was made in my brain between going on vacation and this massively traumatic event. So fast forward 6 years almost, it's now January 2024. Dominic's been, we haven't seen any seizures in a few years since his hemispherectomy. We're in sort of this like new normal place as a family, and we book a family trip, one that we haven't done. First time on an airplane, first time first time leaving the country on an airplane. So I'm excited. The kids are excited. My husband's excited, and I, being the incessant type A planner, I like to pack in advance. I could not bring the suitcase upstairs. I couldn't get it. And weeks were going by. The trip was like 8 days away, 7 days away. Normally, I'd have been fully packed by now with a list of all the things that were in the suitcase. I couldn't get it. And it was only when I sat and realized, wow, I don't want to get it because the last time I packed for a trip, something terrible happened and I'm terrified. I'm terrified to do this again. And so it wasn't about getting rid of the trauma. It was about me sitting with it and giving it space and labeling it for what it was and recognizing that it's okay to be scared. It makes sense. I haven't done this before since that time, and we're going to be okay. And so at the advice of my own therapist and even just my knowledge of trauma is I had to grab the suitcase and I had to very slowly go up the stairs. And every time I got that dysregulation or that feeling in my chest, I had to stop and I had to sort of sit with that feeling, do some deep breaths, remind myself that I was okay, validate the sensation. And I'm sure to someone, if they had seen me on my basement stairs, would have laughed, thinking, what is this person doing, taking 6 minutes to go up her staircase by taking 2 steps, pausing, taking 2 steps, pausing. But that's what I needed to do. And that's because I had one of those waves of trauma. And they come when you least expect it, and they can be teeny tiny or massive, and neither is good or bad. They just are. They're just a reminder of what we've been through. And I did pack the suitcase and we did go on vacation, and it was it was truly incredible that we were able to do that. So the validation really acknowledges and accepts the suck. And that's what I had to do in that moment, was accept that this feeling sucks and I know that and I'm okay. And then I had the option, and I had the option to choose and move forward, or I could just stay on the stairs or not grab the suitcase. And I chose to move forward one step at a time, knowing it was challenging, knowing I'd be triggered again. And so that was that acknowledgement of, I can do this, we can do this. And I'll go into the process more. One of the odd benefits of going through this experience with our son while working as a mental health clinician was I was able to see the trauma and shock as it happened. And as I've met parents through this journey, I've been told many times that a lot of parents have no idea they're in shock. They have no idea what they're going through as trauma for years, until they meet somebody or talk to somebody or hear a story like mine or some of the other people that may speak today, and they think, "Oh my gosh, I felt that, or I thought that, and I didn't have the language that you're giving." And as much as I think it was a benefit that I was able to see it, the problem is that I could see it and know it was happening and do nothing about it. And so it doesn't give us a get out of trauma free card. It doesn't mean that we bypass the grief and the trauma. It just means that, we had a bit more exposure to it. Clients may not be aware that they're impacted by it, but they're aware that their moods are changing. Maybe they're more irritable, maybe they're short-tempered, maybe they seem to be demanding and shrill, maybe they're disconnected and sort of not engaging as much. There's so little in their life that's in their control, and so we respond in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn way. That's the natural limbic system response. Maybe they're making sense of something that seems unfair and inconceivable. So there's no wrong way to do this, right? It's just going to look so different for everybody. It Not honoring the trauma, not giving it the words, not honoring the grief that we feel, though, keeps it stuck in our body. And if anyone here is aware of Dr. Gabor Mate, he talks about trauma not as the experience in the sense of the situation that happened, but rather what happens in our body as the result of that event. And that is the thing that we need to be acknowledging, and the thing that we need to be honoring is that if we don't acknowledge it, it's going to stay stuck in our body and it's going to come out in other ways. And I write about this in Making It to Monday. The first 6 months post-stroke, I refused to acknowledge my emotions. I pushed everything down. When I would feel something like crying, the lump in your throat, I immediately swallowed. I didn't feel like I wanted to accept help from anybody. I wanted to be able to do this on my own. I had it under control, or so I would tell people. And I ignored. And then one day I woke up and I think I turned to the left. I was dancing with my daughter, trying to, give her some attention and have some fun, and completely threw my back out. The pain was excruciating. For weeks, I couldn't even hold a mug of tea without two hands and shaking and bending over. It was quite literally, it stopped me in my tracks. And it was in that moment that I realized this isn't sustainable. I need to make changes. And if you ignore the messages that your brain is telling you, the message will get louder and louder, and it won't stop until it stops you. And so I encourage people to be aware of how they're feeling. Notice if something inside you is changing. I think we do a really good job as caregivers kind of ignoring what our needs are, because we put the needs of our children first. And the needs of our children are, of course, extremely important. And so are ours, because I can tell you, when I couldn't lift my child, or it was even hard to change a diaper because I couldn't lift his leg, that was a rude awakening. And that was a real wake up call for me. So now what? So I've told you the wake up call, but then what do you do? So as parents and caregivers, if you're in the Ontario or Toronto GTA area, you may share my sentiment about sick kids in Holland Bloorview. It's a place that we never ever want to go, and yet we are grateful we have access to it. And I remember grappling with the emotions, especially the second time, of not wanting to go back there. But even the first time, walking into Bloorview with my husband, we had to do a tour before we went in for rehab. And we're walking through the parking lot, and I'm looking at this beautiful building. And I turn to him, and I'm not crying, but I'm looking at him going, I don't want to do this. I don't want to move in here. And he just looked at me and said, I know. I know. And it was one of those things that we have to acknowledge. So I grappled with those emotions about not wanting to go back even in 2020, living in the hospital with my child, and yet being so grateful that we had the opportunity because not everybody does. And that's the reality. And so we had to practice something called the dichotomy or the plurality of truth, where multiple things can be true at one time. I didn't want to do something. I was hesitant or in a bit of resistance, but I was also grateful that we had it. I was angry that we were going back to the hospital and that he'd have to have this surgery because it seemed so unfair to him and to our family. And yet I was so grateful the surgery existed and that there was a surgeon within an hour of my home that could perform it. So the time period was obviously taxing as it would be. And like I said before, the biggest opportunity for growth and change. I wanted to provide some strategies that are rooted in evidence to help with developing self care and wellness that hopefully we can all use in our day to day life. And I have already talked a little bit about the power of language, but this is huge. And there's so much data that's emerging now about power of mindset, and language is important because what our brain hears, it will believe, whether it is true or not. And so if that is the case, we need to be very, very particular about what we talk to ourselves like. So I've changed my language, at least for the most part. I try to be intentional from fear based to opportunity based. So I don't worry about the future all the time. I still worry because I'm human and I still have anxiety, but I often wonder about the future. And even that, if you think about I'm worried about what's going to happen versus I wonder what's going to happen. Worry is coming from a place of fear. We're automatically assuming something bad is going to happen. Wonder is curious. I'm not saying bad things won't happen. I'm not saying it can't go wrong, but at least now we're a little bit more open to the fact that something good could happen. It seems so subtle and maybe even silly to some people, but it is powerful. What we're doing every time we say something like this in a different way is we're creating new neural pathways. And our brain is trained to see the world through a certain lens or filter. And oftentimes, when we're unfortunately dealing with trauma, dealing with a lot of difficult things, we tend to be hypervigilant, right? We need to be on all the time to make sure everything's okay so that something bad doesn't happen, which means we're on the lookout for bad things to happen, which means that's what we're going to see first. And so it doesn't stop bad things from happening, but we also don't need to be so hypervigilant all the time because it can be a detriment to our nervous system. Language is powerful. And just like worry to wonder, the power of yet critical. So I would actually like you to take a minute to think about something that you've been feeling stuck on. Maybe a goal you haven't achieved yet, even an experience you're having difficulty accepting and moving on from. If you've ever thought to yourself, I can't do it, I haven't gotten this, I haven't achieved this goal, say the exact same sentence and just add the word yet. I can't do it yet. I haven't gotten it yet. I haven't achieved this goal yet. Now we've gone from it being final to there being some optimism and open-endedness. Do we know if we're going to get there? No. And we use the power of yet with our son all the time. And so when he couldn't get off the floor by himself, for example, and he was preparing to go to school, and that was something we were thinking about in terms of what his care would look like, it was, I can't, he would get frustrated and I can't get off the floor. Well, you can't get off the floor yet. And lo and behold, I kid you not, 3 days, it was the Friday before Labor Day, 3 days before starting kindergarten, he was in a therapy session and was able to get off the floor. Not beautifully, but he did it. And it was a really big moment for us and for him. The entire energy of that sentence changes. And now, a lot of times, we use it with the whole family. Whenever we're stuck on something, we just haven't gotten it yet. So I have and continue to work towards developing a positive mindset and optimism about the future. And I always say it's with a side of fear because I'm still living in reality and I'm still a little bit, I still have seasons of my life where I feel a little bit more worry or I feel a little bit more anxious. And I accept that now for what it is. It's just a bigger wave of emotion. It's a bigger wave of worry. It doesn't last forever, and I know I'm going to get through it. So I used to fight those waves of anxieties and trauma triggers, try to shove it down, like I mentioned, thinking if I just focused on the positive, if I just pushed through, I would be okay. And I realized by doing that, I was actually giving the fear and trauma way more power and control than I needed to. So it wasn't, but I'm anxious. It's and I can be anxious and still do the scary thing. I mean, this morning I had a lot of excitement and I was very nervous coming to present today. And that's something that those two things can live alongside each other. I used to tell myself I shouldn't be feeling this way, I should be grateful, it could be worse. And that invalidation and that kind of language keeps us in resistance. So we're actually not accepting what we're feeling, and it keeps us in that place of shame and guilt. I was feeding that shame and guilt, which continued the cycle of anxiety and grief. And I often remind clients to stop shoulding all over themselves. And I know what that sounds like. I swear I'm not cursing, but it should sound a little bit like it because that's what we're doing. That's what it feels like. When we say should all the time about ourselves, we're really judging, and we want to get better at being compassionate and being empathetic. And the way to do that is validation and acceptance. So I've learned just how critical it is to give ourselves space to do all of it, to do both, to validate the fear, the overwhelm, or even just the discomfort or the anger that we're feeling in a situation, and allowing ourselves the optimism and the encouragement to move forward. So we want to feel all the emotions. There is no negative feeling. And this is something that we're often taught as children, right? Crying is negative, being angry is negative, and it's actually not. It's very important, and they're very, very healthy. So anger is often if a boundary's been crossed, or we feel we've been treated or someone has been treated unfairly, we might have an angry response, or and that's a natural response we would have. Feeling sad means that something that was meaningful to us, maybe we don't have it anymore, or we had our feelings hurt and we feel sad, or we feel disconnected or rejected. These are important emotions because it allows us to feel the entire spectrum. We can't appreciate happiness and joy and peace if we don't know what the opposite sort of end of those feelings feels like. And so if we never have anxiety or stress, if we never have anger or disappointment, how can we ever expect to feel the joy? And we talk about this with parenting a lot when we have what we call the snowplow parenting concept, which is getting rid of all the challenges and the obstructions that are in front of our children before they go through it so that they have a clear path. And the difficulty there is it doesn't teach resilience, and it doesn't teach them to appreciate the the joy of overcoming adversity, of being able to problem solve, etc. And we do the same thing with ourselves because we often want to avoid negative emotions. And it's not our fault, and it's not our parents' fault. It's we do the best with what we can, and we do the best with what we know at that time. So we have to accept what is, even when we don't like it. And I often say, I'm never going to look back on 2018 with warm, fuzzy feelings and be super happy that that happened. I am, however, able to look back now and be very grateful for all the things that we've learned, not just about myself, not just about the strength of my children, but even the resilience that they have, the resilience of my marriage, the knowledge I have even of relationships, even the ones that didn't last as a result of this change. That's helpful for me, and that's helped me grow. So letting go of the responsibility to own someone else's emotions is critical because we also accept what is in our control and what is not. And sometimes that can be difficult in relationships, like I talked about, not necessarily marriages or partnerships, but even friendships, um, and colleagues, things like that. And then once we do the validation and acceptance, we choose to move forward one step at a time. So after surgery, Dominic started to develop again. His speech started to return. He was able to start walking again a few weeks later with support. He had new vision loss. He lives with harmonious hemianopsia and exacerbated weakness on his left side, but his personality was generally the same. And every day that went by without a seizure, I felt like it was a tiny celebration. Rather than think of things in finalities, like the seizures are gone forever, I celebrate each day as a win when he doesn't have one. And I started to, and I continue to focus on the here and now. And epilepsy actually taught me the importance of letting go of the need to try and control the future. It's some weird twisted gift that forced me to be mindful in the here and now. And I am much more mindful as a result because nothing brings you back to the present moment quite like when someone's having a seizure. And I thought to myself, if I could be this focused and this on in this moment, couldn't I learn to do the same with the moments that bring me peace and the moments that are joyful? I will never look and think of epilepsy with warm, fuzzy feelings for how it's impacted our lives, but I do regard it as a major catalyst in our growth. And it's during these periods of time that like I said, I've never learned more about myself as a person, a mother, even a clinician. And that's the funny thing with the crisis, right? It was a great classroom. And I'm also grateful that I've learned about my own strength and the strength of my village. And part of that village is one that I've had to create since then because the village often changes. So our experience with epilepsy, and stroke has taught us to appreciate life in a different way. Enjoying the moments of calm. I now call boredom blissful. It's blissfully boring when life doesn't have exciting twists and turns. We can enjoy the dance party in the living room. We don't take for granted little wins like we would have before. You know, a tooth falls out and we celebrate it. Going to the potty. I mean, I might as well have thrown a parade for my child when he learned how to do that. There, you know, nothing, it can be a painful exercise when you have to go through these even micro traumas, major traumas, health crises. And it's also an important one because it teaches us the power of perspective. If we can become focused on moments like that, then we can do the same with joy. And so the reality, though, is we're often dysregulated as parents. There are physical symptoms that happen when we feel stressed. So we might feel that adrenaline running through our body. We might feel the discomfort in our abdomen. We may feel tightness in our chest or that lump in our throat. Headaches, pressure, tension in the neck and shoulders, you name it, and we can feel it. Sweating is one of them as well. And so there are a few strategies I'd love to try. And I should have mentioned, if you have a pillow, you can join me in some of these exercises. I'd actually love for you to try them. I'm going to start at the bottom and move my way up. And you don't have to do any of these if you're not, if you don't want to or you're not able, but I do think they're really great strategies that you can practice from time to time. So butterfly tapping is simply putting your arms over your chest, crossed over, and you tap left and right. And while you do this, you take a deep breath. And you do this for about 30 seconds to a minute. And all we're doing is bringing ourselves back to the moment. We're allowing our nervous system to calm and maybe just noticing what's happening in our body. And this can be very calming. So this is called bilateral stimulation because we're doing things on either side of the body. And this can be done in conjunction with visualizations. This can be in conjunction with other types of therapy, but it can be very helpful and very calming. So that's one that you can try. Another one is humming. And I always say people underestimate the power of humming, but the vibrational effect of the hum that we feel has a calming effect on our nervous system. And this is why children and people that are perhaps non-speaking but use vocalizations as a way to calm or stim, this is where that comes from, is it is a calming and grounding experience. And so there's nothing wrong with that. And the other thing I kind of think about when I think of humming is if you've ever practiced yoga, the om. And the om, that's the vibration. And that's a similar sort of sound that we're going for. So we can always use humming as a way to try to regulate. Progressive muscle relaxation, I do a lot with kids. It tends to be really, really, really fun for them, but also we can use it as adults. And this is where we isolate muscle groups from our toes up to our head. And we really, essentially, we're using the cortisol and the adrenaline, that stress hormone that's in the body, and we're trying to expend that energy when we don't have a lot of space to do it, or we maybe don't have the balance to do, like we can do it sitting, so we don't necessarily have to stand. And so how it would work, I'd love it if you, I can't see anyone, but if you'd love to try it with me, I think that would be great. So you actually inhale through the nose for 5, and as you when you hold at the top, you're going to squeeze your toes as tight as possible. So we're inhaling, squeeze, 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 squeeze. And then exhale and release. Sort of shake it out a little. And then we move on to our calf muscles. So we inhale and we tighten our calf muscles. I'm on my toes right now. Tight, tight, tight. And then release. I tend to have to shake it out because I get cramps when I do that. The next would be our quads and or hamstrings. You can just squeeze your legs together if you want to, or if you're able. So you inhale and squeeze your legs together. Tight, tight, tight. And relax. Sort of shake it out. Everybody's favorite and largest muscle is our gluteus maximus, or the caboose, and you're going to inhale through the nose and squeeze your butt. Squeeze, 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 squeeze. And release, sort of moving in your seat. The next is your abdomen. And when you're doing this, you're going to imagine you're sticking a stack of books on your abdomen, or someone's about to give it a tap. And so you inhale and you tighten. Tight, tight, tight. And then exhale, loosen. You may notice you're starting to feel a bit more relaxed. You may yawn while you're doing this activity. That's a good sign. The next one is our hands. So we inhale through the nose Squeeze our fists really, really tight. And then release it, shake it out. Next is our bicep, tricep. I usually go on a 90-degree angle. So you inhale, tighten, and release. And I'll do our shoulders to end. You inhale through the nose. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. And exhale. And I also do my face where we squeeze it, although I feel like it's giving me premature wrinkles, or maybe I'm just getting old, I'm not sure, but you can inhale through your nose and tighten your face. And then exhale. And we're nice and loose. So I feel a yawn coming on right now. This can be a very helpful strategy. It's also helpful not just when we're feeling angry or dysregulated, but sometimes it can be helpful before going to bed. So if we tend to have pent up energy before bed, or we want to get out of our head, we're not thinking about anything else when we have to think about tensing our biceps or flexing our abs. That is something that can help be a grounding exercise. And then deep diaphragmatic breathing and somatic breathing with a pillow are similar. I have a pillow here. I'm going to demonstrate it for you. And I just realized it's not a pillow, it's my daughter's giant stuffy, but that's okay. You can use whatever you need. So this is my pillow today. If you have like a square pillow from a couch or something, that would work well. And most of the time when people do deep diaphragmatic breath for me, when I'm teaching them a relaxation strategy, they look at me and they go, ah, and I say, no, that's not how we want to do it. So how you want to breathe is by engaging the diaphragm. The diaphragm lives sort of near where the rib cage comes together, and there's a vagus nerve. That vagus nerve is very important because when it engages, it goes up into the brain to our parasympathetic nervous system and allows us to calm down. So in order to engage it, we actually need to breathe deeper into the base of the lungs, expanding the belly. That engages the diaphragm and sort of tugs on the vagus nerve. So instead of breathing into the shoulders, I often encourage people to have a hand on their abdomen. And when you inhale, you're really expanding like a balloon, and exhaling, bringing the belly button to spine. And the ideal is you want to inhale for 5, hold for 5, exhale for 5 to 7 if you're able, and then a little bit of a pause. And they call it box breathing, 5, 5, 5, 5. So, and I'm, you can find this online. This isn't difficult, but we inhale through the nose, hold, and then exhale. And the way it works with the pillow is that exact breathing, but you put a pillow up to your body. One hand goes over where the heart center is, or the heart chakra. One hand goes over the solar plexus, which is where the diaphragm is. And we inhale, pushing into our body. Exhale, releasing. And then we do the same thing again. And what we're doing here, and the reason the pillow is so important, is if we have our hands directly on our body, we're not going to get the same regulation, because what we're doing right now is we're mimicking a hug. And a hug is the easiest way to regulate our nervous system. But we don't always have access to someone that we can hug, or someone that we feel safe hugging. And so we grab something plush, soft, a pillow. Some people use a weighted blanket. You name it, we can use it. So these are just a couple of strategies that you could take with you, hopefully to help in the day-to-day, because some days are wonderful and some days are an absolute hot mess. So the how of happiness. So I work within a framework of positive psychology, which is a new facet of psychology that's been studied over the last 50 years or so. Historically, for hundreds of years before that, we really studied what was wrong with the brain and how to fix it. And positive psychology does the opposite. It looks at what's going well. What are the most highly effective, highly happy people doing, and how can we emulate that? So I've seen firsthand in my own experience how applying some of these tools or strategies increase happiness and wellness. And the data informs my practice, and I've seen it with clients as well. And the science is there. I mean, the research is there. So a few key takeaways. I mean, I could do an entire presentation on the how of happiness, but these fall in line with self-care so well that I thought I would just bring a few highlights. So happiness is an option. I used to say happiness is a choice. It is, although it seems a bit simplistic when we say that. It's always an option. Sometimes it's a very, very, very difficult option. Sometimes it's very easy, but it's always within our control to choose it, or at least to try and choose it. So there are tools to help increase happiness, and those include things like regular exercise. And I'm not talking about joining an F45 gym or running a marathon unless that's something that is meaningful to you and you love, and in which case I salute you because that's incredible. But it's really any aerobic or anaerobic exercise that's going to increase your heart rate and allow you to expend some of that stress energy, but also benefit from endorphins. For some people, it's walking outside. For some people, it's doing squats or push-ups at the bedside of their child. For some people, it's a wall squat while they're supervising their kids. It could be a dance party. It doesn't matter. It's unique to you, but we want to start with the smallest amount. You can start with as little as, 90 seconds of exercise to see some benefit in terms of mood. Meditation and mindfulness. If I had a nickel for every time somebody comes into my office telling me, I tried meditation and Jen, it's not good. It doesn't work for me because I sit there and I'm listening to the guided meditation and I take a deep breath. And then 10 seconds later, I'm thinking, I left that load in the laundry and oh my gosh, I forgot to take the sausages out of the freezer for dinner. And did Timmy get his medicine? And did I book that appointment with the specialist? And it just doesn't work. And to which I say, you noticed that your mind wandered and you met it with frustration, which was, this isn't working. If we meet the wandering mind with, my mind's wandering. I'm thinking about all the things I have to do today. I noticed the thought, and now I'm going back to my breath. That is meditation. Meditation does not mean we shut off our brain entirely. It means we become aware of it. We're becoming mindful. We're sitting in that. We're trying to connect with our body. And so naturally, when our brains are used to going 100 kilometers an hour all the time, we're going to have interruptions, and that's completely natural. Over time, when we notice those thoughts without judgment, and we are able to say, okay, I've seen the thought, I am acknowledging it, and I'm coming back to my breath, or I'm coming back to my awareness. The more we do that, the less frequent the thoughts are going to be and the less intense the thoughts are going to be. And we then actually do slow down the mind and we are able to get some of that clarity. But meditation and mindfulness is a practice and it takes many, many weeks of consistency in order to see the benefits, but the benefits are rather large. It's like better problem solving and decision making, better sleep, lower stress, you name it. There's a lot of benefits to it. So I always say, give it another try, but change the mindset around it. Deep diaphragmatic breathing, we just did. Journaling, and this can be voice notes, this could be a video blog, this could be like pen to paper is ideal from a psychological perspective because there's something about our handwriting that our eyes really connect to and learn from really well. And so it's a form of externalization. All the thoughts that are swirling around in your head are swirling around anyway. When we write it down, our eyes see it on the paper and it sort of tells our brain, I don't have to keep focusing on it. It's right here. I'm not going to forget. Also, sometimes when we write things down, it loses its power. And so something that made us incredibly angry or incredibly stressed out, we write it down and all of a sudden we're able to see it more clearly, or we're able to problem solve it, or we're able to forgive it a little bit more. Excuse me. An act of kindness. This is probably the quickest way to boost mood, and it doesn't need to cost money. It can be simple as like holding the door open for someone or saying good morning to someone on a walk. When we do something nice for someone else, not only do they feel good because somebody's done something nice for them, but it increases our endorphins as well. And I spent a lot of my teenage years working at Tim Hortons. And I remember back in the day, this is going back over 20 years ago. I don't know if it's still a thing. They started this trend where someone at the drive-thru would say, oh, I'm going to pay for the coffee for the person behind me's coffee. And I worked the drive-through and I remember like the person paying felt good because they were paying. And then the person showing up to get their free coffee who didn't know they were getting their free coffee, all of a sudden the elation they had, and oftentimes what happened was they'd pay it forward. And so it was a very cool way to see act of kindness and how that ripple effect can take hold. I think one time we got 25 cars in a row or something. And it's wild that I remember it, but even that is important because it's that ripple effect. I didn't get a free coffee. I didn't do anything, but I got to witness it and it was so beautiful. Having something to look forward to is not on here, but it is important. And it doesn't need to be huge. So it doesn't need to be a trip away or, you know, anything fancy. It can be bedtime on a particularly challenging day. I can't wait. I look forward to going to bed. It can be an event you had on the weekend. It could be today's event. Maybe you were looking forward to coming and connecting with other parents or seeing and hearing from speakers that have lived experience and some professional strategies. And It's always good to have something to look forward to, even teeny tiny things. I know today, after this, I'm very much looking forward to sitting with a novel for half an hour, which I don't often get to do during the day, but that's something I've made time for. So certain strategies are going to work better for others. It is important though to find what works for you, and oftentimes it's trial and error. Self-care is embedded in all of these, but when I talk about self-care, I'm not necessarily talking about, the Thermea spa 3 times a week, although that would be lovely, or a massage every week. That's not sustainable for a lot of people. It might need to be these micro doses of self-care, whether it's that validation, connecting with someone for camaraderie, doing some of that somatic breathing, journaling, etc. You sort of we have to learn to embed it in our everyday, because self-care, not a negotiable, and it's not a nice to have, it's a need to have if we want to take care of other people. So comparison is the thief of joy, which I did talk about a little bit before. When I talk about this, I really want to know what people are consuming. Are you on social media? Are you on Instagram or TikTok or Twitch or X or whatever, Twitter, all these things? What kind of content are you looking at and engaging with, and how is it impacting your mood and mental health? How many times have you found yourself mindlessly scrolling or grabbing at your phone with the purpose, like grabbing your phone for something else, and you end up back on social media without even realizing it? Sometimes watching videos, hearing stories can increase the mental load of parents and exhaustion. It can lead to feelings of overwhelm, disappointment, frustration. It can also lead to connection and validation. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky. There have been profoundly positive impacts that I have had engaging in Facebook parent groups of kids of pediatric stroke, or um, the parent advocacy link. And like, there's many different groups that have been so wonderful. And yet when I'm in a season of my life where maybe I'm experiencing more trauma symptoms or I'm experiencing more grief symptoms, sometimes it can be overwhelming, and I have to be aware enough in my body, so doing those steps from before, to say I need to take a step back from this, or can I engage and be as helpful as possible? When we're looking at things passively, so this would be like the TikToks, the Instagram reels, things like that, and the topic is always about the load, the heaviness, the challenges, that we have to remember language, right? What our brain hears, it's going to believe, that's how we're going to start seeing the world. And it's not that it's not important to validate, but if it's all we're consuming, how are we supposed to feel joy? How are we supposed to also find the happiness in our day? Is it unfair, some of the things that we have to do? 100% it's unfair. It's ridiculous. And also, I want to love my life. I'm choosing to do that, and I'm choosing to focus on the things that are in my control. And some days that's easy, and some days I'm going to sit and watch the reels and have a little pity party, and that's okay as long as I don't stay stuck there. Right? And that's the important thing. So when we start comparing ourselves to others, no matter which direction we look, we end up feeling depleted. So if we look at those that have it more complicated, we minimize, I shouldn't complain, that judgment, right? How can I how can I or how can they manage and I'm struggling when they have it worse than I do, whatever worse means, right? That's so subjective. Or the opposite, which is seeing that everybody, has it all together, which, when we're looking online, we're seeing less than 1%. And I need to be clear, and I use social media, I've posted before about our journey, but everything that we see there is curated. Even the most vulnerable of posts, even the most raw things that people are posting, they've chosen to post it, and they're choosing to give us that snapshot. And so we need to take that with a grain of salt. Looking at the content that focuses on finding joy, on being grateful, on accepting help, the human experience and all its imperfections, also validation, can lead to feelings of happiness. And better yet, I say, let's limit what we see, full stop. So I'm not saying don't use it, but if we're on it hours a day, this is probably problematic. And also, to go a step further, it's not even just social media, it's also news, which we know is not trauma informed. Again, I'm not suggesting that we keep our heads in the sand. I am suggesting that we notice what it's doing to our nervous system. There's one thing to be informed, there's another to be in fear. And those are two different things. So remembering the power of perspective, what we consume will impact what we think and feel. What our brain hears, it believes over time. And it's why repetitive marketing works. It's why when our kids ask us for something for the umpteenth time, we're very, we really are tempted to just give in and give them the thing that they say that they want because we're so frustrated and tired. And if something that you're consuming gives you a negative emotional reaction, we're naturally inclined to keep looking, right? Particularly if it's anger or fear, because the fear wants to have some sort of resolution. And so we generally keep looking. So the one thing I always remind people is, please don't go looking for fairness. it doesn't exist, and the world isn't fair sometimes, and so that won't bring us joy. We have to make joy for ourselves sometimes. Okay. I also thought in part of self-care was how can we help lighten our load? And a lot of our job as we're parenting in this, and at least what I've learned over the years, is I have worked in hospital, I've worked in education, and I now am a parent in both those worlds. And so as a registered social worker, I spent several years working at a school board, and I supported students with mental health needs. And now as a parent, I'm advocating the special education world, and I'm sitting at meetings at a different side of the table, right, with a different lens. And I've sort of coupled what I've learned in the field with my personal life, and I just wanted to provide some strategies that hopefully will help. So I do talk about how collaboration leads to connection, and we can be the leaders of this. So when we come into a meeting and we talk about wanting to be part of the team, wanting to collaborate to meet the needs of this child, this can be very helpful. We also want to learn about the team, like who are the people that are working with our kids, and are we able to build some type of connection and or relationship with them? We are there for one common goal. And so, for example, if I'm talking about education, our common goal in our case is to get Dominic the best education he can to be as independent as he is capable of being by the time he is 18. That is sort of our goal together. And I'd like to reiterate that we're all sort of part of that team. Offer information and data that's really there to inform and support. And I know it's exhausting because we tend to have to tell people this all the time over and over again, which can be very difficult and draining. Um, the second note is lead with data. This, I got one sentence of advice when I first started navigating the education system as a parent, and it was really helpful. And it was show me the data. When services are being clawed back, which seems to be every time I have a transition meeting with the school, and the school proposes changes that negatively impact our child, we simply need to ask for the data that supports these changes and how they're in the best interest of our child's safety and education. And they need to support that. And if there isn't that data to support it, then why are we making these decisions? If it's simply a fiscal issue, then we have to talk about how that impacts human rights and an access to equitable education. And that's a different conversation, but this is something that it's helpful to get ready for the next step, which is to be prepared to have difficult and brave conversations, which we're going to have. It's okay to disagree with professionals, but it's important to be respectful because we want to have that mutual respect and understanding. We also want to be able to communicate with each other. So we need to be prepared to sit with uncomfortable feelings, and we want to recognize that the people around the table are the experts in their field. We are the experts in our children. So if if we're angry and frustrated about something, it's often not the faces at the table, but rather the structure that they represent. And that's important. We can even articulate that. I know I've said that before. I've come across as a bit abrasive, and I've said, I understand this is not you. This is the structure that you're working within. It's just as a parent, this is incredibly frustrating. And I do find that that's helpful because we're all humans and we all have an ego, and sometimes we can get defensive as well. So encourage your child to be a part of the conversation if and where possible. This isn't always going to be possible, but if your child is able to participate in school and medical meetings in preparing for them for the transition to adulthood and independence, this is always going to be of benefit to them. So be prepared to ask for clarification. Let's be honest, we're exhausted. I now tell people I have a one in, one out policy with my brain. So if you tell me something new, I'm probably going to lose something old because I just don't know that I have capacity for it, especially when I'm trying to manage, you know, a dozen people in the medical system, another dozen people in the education system. Neither of the two talk to each other. I'm trying to relay information. I end up being a case manager for my child because nobody else really does that. So I sometimes need to ask for clarification, or I need someone to repeat it twice. I used to feel really guilty about this because I felt like, oh, I don't want to take up their time, or, I should know what this means. And I've now realized it's absolutely okay. And this is part of accepting help, and accepting like this is what it is, and I'm going to need a little more help. Always take notes. So if you're able, take your own notes in meetings or bring a support person with you. You can hire advocates that can come and sit with you to hold professionals accountable, and it is a nice way to have a third party involved, so it's not just sort of parents that are leading that. I know special services at home sometimes will cover this as a support person or other supportive funding. If you have a village and you're able to bring somebody that is like a friend or family member, maybe they do the writing so that you can participate in the meeting and you have the notes. You should also get notes from the school, but this is just something to think about. I recognize this seems like a lot and it may not feel like it's totally tied to self-care, but when we have sort of a checklist of things that we can do, it feels a little less daunting. But I do want to be clear, you do not need to expect to do all of these things perfectly all the time. This is a learning process as we go. And, it's okay if it feels messy and it's okay if it's not perfect. And then offloading the overwhelm. So accepting help, knowing that it won't be done our way. I'm still struggling with this because I live with people who, for some reason, do not fold towels in a way that fits our closet, and it drives me banana sandwich. But I'm getting over it, and I'm recognizing that as long as they're folded and shoved in there, I can't really complain. In order to create space for myself to be cared for, I have to accept that things aren't going to be done the way that I like it. And it's not about getting it done right. It's about getting it done, period. So relinquishing control and avoiding blame where possible if something goes awry. With parents that have children with high medical needs, at least in my practice, the ones that I work with, I hear all the time about the lack of consistency in care. Nurses don't show up, or they get relocated, or there's something that comes up and there's, absenteeism. There's also gaps in the system. We just don't have enough staff, wait times for respite, the fear of leaving home that some parents express because if God forbid something happens and they're not there, they feel it will be their fault. I don't want to invalidate this experience because it's very likely you're holding a lot together all the time. And also, this is this is part of the problem that keeps us stuck. We can't avoid bad things from happening every time. And if we are doing that at the cause of our mental and emotional well-being, then we're not valuing our own life. And this is important. And it's not at the devaluation of someone else's. That's not what this is about. This is about creating space for ourselves to heal. So we do need to learn to advocate for respite at all levels. I think, this includes us writing letters to MPs and MPPs and local councilmen and whoever we need to, local children's treatment centers. Also we need to, I mean, this is a systemic issue, but investing in that is going to be critical. But the reality is many of us on the call today have been traumatized by something that was unlikely to happen. So Dominic is considered like 1 in a million in terms of the things that have happened in the sequence in which they've happened. And so somebody telling me, just like I'm telling you, oh, but go and take care of yourself because the chances of something going wrong are so low, means very little to someone when something the unlikely has already happened. So we need to acknowledge that and also acknowledge that that trauma and that anxiety lives within us. And that is something we probably need to take care of first. In the end, we need to remind ourselves that we've made it through 100% of the worst days of our life already. They're done. You're here today. And so we actually have the tools and the skills and the strength to make it through whatever comes our way at any time. The last thing I'd talk about is minimizing the load where you can. So this might mean, minimizing extracurricular activities. Maybe we do simple meal prep or we are buying frozen dinners or whatever we need to do, limiting the number of activities or therapies in a week. This is important because there is something called therapeutic fatigue, and that can be for like medical therapy, but also even just all the stuff kids do, the swimming, the jujitsu, the dance classes, whatever. Yeah. Remember that us doing it all for our kids and those around us doesn't help our kids thrive. And our kids being overscheduled doesn't either. So we can get started today, and I'll leave you with this. This is usually the first thing I tell clients that I'm working with, and something that I practiced as well in the start of my journey, which is a gratitude practice. So you want to start with 3 things that you're grateful for from each day. Um, I generally recommend it at bedtime. You don't have to do it at bedtime, but it is a nice way to sort of set the seed for a positive night's sleep. And we need to be very specific. So it's not actually about what you're grateful for. It's about the process of scanning your day for gratitude. So I'll do this with clients 3 weeks later. They'll come back and say, yeah, I did it. I'm Jen, every day. I'm grateful for my house. I'm grateful for my partner, and I'm grateful for my kids. Not specific enough. What about it yesterday? What were you grateful for yesterday? Maybe it's I stood in front of the window and the sun poured in and it felt warm on my skin, and I felt really grateful to have that space in that moment. That's a piece that you can be grateful for. I'm really grateful that I got to drink 3 sips of my tea before the talk started today, because now it's pretty cool and I won't be able to get to it warm again. On really rough days, I'm grateful the day is over. I got through this, I was going to swear, but this storm that we had today, and now I don't have to deal with it again. And again, it's remembering you've been through 100% of the worst days of your life. So we want to train the brain to start to see these micro joys, because over time, when we do it with intention, then we can actually start doing it on autopilot. But that takes a little bit of time to do. So acceptance, or throughout my journey as a parent and caregiver, I've experienced significant pain, trauma, learning, and healing. And as I wrote in Making It to Monday, there were periods that were very dark, like very dark. My own guilt and shame that I wasn't doing enough or feeling helpless or sorry for my family or myself had a much louder voice than it does now. Grief is a very real thing. I often had incredible guilt and shame about the grief until I realized it was the shame and grief that kept me stuck in that cycle. And so with acceptance, I was able to start letting it go. Acceptance doesn't mean we like something. It does mean that we acknowledge it. We allow our space to feel whatever it is that we feel about it, and we choose happiness and find joy and gratitude in our day. The brain is an incredibly powerful organ, and it has the power to learn and unlearn thought patterns. The latter is more difficult than the former. So it is harder to unlearn than it is to learn, but it's absolutely worth it to try. So I write about this and other strategies that help me heal in the book, Making It to Monday. And I really talk about my own struggle on my road to healing alongside my child's. And I realized one day that I was banking on neuroplasticity to help Dominic heal. And I was doing the exact same thing for myself and the exact same thing for my client. We are rewiring our brain, and we are learning to think in a different way and create new neural pathways. So there is no difference except that the what we're working on might be. One valuable learning was that it's not about the end result. It's not about our output. It is about our effort. And that is what needs to be celebrated, not just our kids, but ourselves as parents. Marathon runners don't become marathon runners at the end of the marathon, at the finish line. They become marathon runners at the start, when they sign up, when they go to training. And so, what if we started to celebrate the starting line? And maybe we could all, as parents and caregivers, start celebrating making it to Monday. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much. Happy to connect if anybody has questions now or if they wanted to connect later. And I'll stop sharing.
So thank you, Jennifer. Um, I could, I mean, everything you talked about, I resonated with completely. I was making a ton of notes. I know when you and I talked initially about sort of what this might look like, and we said, oh, this could be a full day.
Yeah.
This could be an absolute full day. And we were very much along the lines of what were some key things that we can impart on our attendees that were practical, that made sense, that they could do, that weren't just go have a bubble bath and,
Mhm.
all of those things, go on vacation, go to a spa 3 times a week. And so I think you really hit the nail on the head by, what are some things that we can do in practical terms, and that, that we can sort of keep in our toolbox, because sometimes we find ourselves in a crisis mode where we forget those things, as was
Yeah.
referenced. And I know for me, the new thing I do is 5 4 3 2 1. I
Yes.
do that repeatedly, 5 4 3 2 1, in the middle of the night, 5 4 3 2 1, to get myself out of those thinking patterns and to sort of try to bring it back to what's important. And the ideas of gratitude, and those are hard to find, and at the end of the day, they're very hard to find.
Mm.
But when you take a look at simple things like, I'm grateful for a cup of hot tea, I'm grateful for this amazing Netflix show, and I'm grateful for something else, and you realize it doesn't have to be, I'm grateful for my MBA, or I'm grateful for my
Right.
intense wealth, or I'm grateful. They can be those things that you're truly just taking a moment. And so, I'm very grateful that, you were able to share with attendees some of those practical tips, some of those experiences I think that we all resonate with on a really deep level. And, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's overwhelming. It takes us in different waves. We find ourselves unprepared more often than not. And so, what are those things that we can, again, kind of think about, and just kind of have available to us when we need them, and what are those ways? And I think another thing you really touched on, which was important to hear, was we have to give ourselves that grace. We have to get rid of that guilt.
Yeah.
I'm a big one for comparison is a thief of joy. I constantly compare to
Mhm.
other people, and it's not, we can't do that. Everything is relative. And what social media puts out there is, like you said, it's a two-headed beast, because
Yeah.
it's given us the ability to do things like this, to connect with others. I'm really proud of the groups that we moderate and we participate in, but then it does have the other side of things, which can be, so difficult. So,
Mhm.
so much of what you talked about today just really resonates. And, if anyone has, I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anyone just has you know, we have a couple minutes before we go ahead. We're going to do a draw to give away some copies of your book. But if anybody wants to put a hand up, I would be happy to unmute you if you wanted to make a comment or if you had a question. You know, if there was anything that you wanted to share, you know, briefly, we do have a couple of minutes. If you wanted to type something in the chat, I would absolutely encourage you to go ahead and do that, because I could continue to talk and, you know, and really relate to what you said. So we have a hand up here. Let me just, yes, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay, perfect. Well, first, I just wanted to thank you so much for that. Like Brenda said, I think everything you spoke about really hit home for me, and I could relate to so many of the challenges that you mentioned. And even it always used to drive me crazy when people said, take a bath, because I thought, well, someone needs to clean my bathtub first. It's not me.
That's right.
But like it just it seems so trivializing in some ways in terms of recognizing the challenges of taking care of yourself. For me, I'm a single parent with absolutely no network. The traumatic birth of our child led her father to not be able to handle it, and he fled back to the United States at some point. So, you know, some of what you're saying, I really appreciate the idea of trying to accept and reach out for help. But I find it sometimes tricky, and I don't always know where to find it. And I find that I'm constantly looking for resources that are just hard to find. And I don't know if, because I know that there are things out there, like even I go through these phases like late at night where I'm, you know, even looking for support groups, for example, like online support groups. And I never seem to get very far because I just don't know where to find things. And it ends up taking up so much of my energy just trying to look for these things. And I don't know if you have any suggestions about things like that, about just accessing, like, you know, not just navigating the system that we have to work through with medical stuff, but also just accessing supports that may be available we don't know about.
For sure, yeah. So I actually I did a talk last week, and this question came up as well, which was a really important one, in that a lot of parents identify that connecting on the ground with other parents is going to be the number one way to get other resources. And so one thing that I typically would recommend in an informal way is those, I think I had mentioned like some of the Facebook groups, for example, and I don't know the situation with your child, but usually there'll be, you know, sometimes like diagnostic specific perhaps, but maybe more general. And first it's joining them, and then it's asking that question, and you'd be surprised, like some of the most helpful information that I've gotten about resources for kids with my son's type of hemiplegia and harmonious hemianopsia has come from those groups, not from the medical staff, not from education, from parents that I don't like to use the word, like the term in the trenches, but we're the ones doing the work on the ground. And so I would probably start there. Support groups nowadays generally for parents are virtual, which has a benefit and a drawback in the sense that it's accessible, which is incredible because you could be all over the province or all over the country. It can be a bit less personal if you're not like sitting in a room with these parents, but also then it becomes much harder to attend. So I would probably, I would encourage you to start there. The other thing is, I don't know where you're located, but if you have a children's treatment center, oftentimes they'll have like a list of resources depending on the type of resource you're looking for. So I'm in Peel Halton, and so Erin Oak is our children's resource, children's treatment center, and I've reached out to them before looking for certain supports, and sometimes they offer it, or they'll have a third party that they recommend as somebody that I could actually, that's how I found the school advocate, was through Erin Oak I had asked about, and they gave me a list of names and then I vetted them. But it is overwhelming, and it is a lot of work, and sometimes it feels like it's, you know, it's almost like I have all this stuff on my plate, but I have to add one more in order to take something off. And then it becomes a trade-off of, do I have the energy to add that one more thing? So giving yourself a bit of compassion about that is I think also going to be important. I hope that answers
Thanks
your
so
question.
much. That's
We
helpful. Thank
do.
you.
Good, good. And I was also going to say too, just to that point, I mean, I don't want to ever self-promote. It's not what I do. But I have that same mug, Jennifer. Oh my gosh, I'm not
You
using it.
can
I'm
you
giving it to
can
my
do
husband.
you've got this. Yeah.
I give it to my husband because mine says something about being the best person. Anyways, but what I was going to say is, the same thing, I moderate a group called Parent Advocacy Link, and we started it over 10 years ago, and we did it for that exact same reason, just to bring together families of children with neurodiversity so that we could connect. And we've seen it grow over time, and honestly, it's become like a lifeline for me, even all of these years later, as my son is transitioning to adult. And, we often say some of the biggest questions, some of the biggest things we get on there, like where to find an AFO sock. And, that today I think is still one of our most trending posts, because nobody has that information other than someone who's looking for that information, or who's been down that road. So to the things that both of you just spoke to is really that peer connection is such a huge part. The resources that come out of peer support and lived experience and shared experiences is so important. So I do, in addition to all of those formalized things like the treatment centers and things like that, I think the advice of connecting with peers whenever or wherever possible, if that's an option, is really, really key. We do have a question in the chat. So it is, I took so many notes. I love the idea, microdosing of self-care. The concept of doing squats at bedside is brilliant. One question I would have would be how to find time to process when the trauma is ongoing and never slowing.
So there are going to be, sorry, I'm assuming this is for me. I'm
Yes,
answering.
it is. Yes.
So I would say, like, at some point when we're engaging in what's called complicated and complex trauma or ongoing trauma, likely we need the help of a professional, right? So someone who can help guide us through this. And I recognize that this is cost prohibitive for some people. Access can be difficult, but finding someone who specializes in medical trauma, who understands that, is, I think, going to be immensely helpful. Also, somatic treatment. So that nervous system regulation is likely going to be helpful in those moments, because we can't stop the trauma from happening. But what we want to do is be able to work through it, right? We can't go, this is the issues. We can't go around it. There is no going around it. There's no getting over it. We got to go, we have to go through it. And so I do think there is a place, and again, I'm not, it doesn't need to be me. I just mean in general, like sometimes we need to engage with a professional who has some understanding. They don't need to have lived experience, but they have to have an understanding and a really good repertoire of traumatic, trauma-informed, therapies that are going to be helpful. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you so much. Again, my grateful piece today will be obviously the opportunity to be a part of this today, but to hear, your lived experience and your shared wisdom for everybody today. And so I can't thank you enough. We are going to do a quick draw right now before we get to our next speaker. Kate, if you could bring that up, and we're going to do a draw for a number of copies of Jennifer's books. Making it to Monday. So again, thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us. So we are going to spin the wheel, and you'll see your name pop up. And what we'll do is we will reach out to all of the winners after to get information on where to send copies of your book. Okay. So congrats, Lorena. Congrats to Ashley. Congrats to Nick. Congrats to Kim. We just have a few more to go. Congrats to Renee. And like I said, we will reach out to our winners to get information on where to send the copies of the books for you. Leah, I think we just have a few more to go. Oh, congrats to Erin. How many more do we have there, Kate? 3 more, I think.
Yes, that's correct. 3 more.
Great, thank you. Yara. All right, is this the last one, Kate? I think so.
This is the last one.
Great, thank you. All right, and the final winner of one of Jennifer's books is Aisha. So perfect, thank you. Like I said, we'll reach out to everybody and get information so we can send you off your copy. And without further ado, we are going to move on to our next speaker, who I have the privilege of introducing. So we're just gonna bring her information up here on the screen. All right, well, we'll get to your we'll get to your slide there, Leslie. So Leslie Donaldson Reed is joining us today. Leslie Donaldson is a proud mother to a micro preemie with special needs, frequently companionable wife, Canadian registered nurse, and a born-again writer. Her first book is a work of nonfiction, Growing a Rainbow, The Premature Journey of a 2-Pound Hero. It's a love story that resonates with all parents about a boy born 3 months early who weighs less than a pair of shoes. Leslie is going to speak to us today on the topic of a heart in the margins. And so welcome, Leslie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to do my send request for sharing the screen.
Of course.
Let's do that one. I think we're good to go, yes?
Yeah, look, yeah, we are good to go.
Excellent. Do you have a frozen shot of my face or is it a live video?
We can just see a frozen shot.
Well, that's not acceptable because it's a totally horrible look. There we go. Better?
There we go, much better.
Okay. First of all, before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land that I live, work, and play on is the traditional territory of many ancestral nations, and that my home city of Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And I also want to say how proud I am of all of you to take a moment for yourselves to be here this morning. It's really hard to do. Ironically, my kid's over at Bloorview today. I made husband take a sick day to go take him. So I understand completely what it's like to find that time and how hard it is. As mentioned, I am an author and I'm also a video game writer and designer, but principally for years, I was an emergency nurse and I worked principally in adult acute medicine and emergency care. And my presentation is going to focus on one aspect of what Jennifer was talking about with respect to self-care, and that's about journaling. So that's why I've called it a heart in the margins. We've all persevered through medical and mental health complications that few people experience. Journaling created a sanctuary that was just about me in an increasingly complex and emotionally difficult world that was pushing me as a person to its periphery. And as I tell you why and how journaling helped me get through all of it, some of these things may be triggering. However, I want you to know that I share these with the utmost sensitivity to you and to Torin, my son, who continues to let me share our experience of his story. After turning to reproductive medicine to get pregnant, I had placental abruption and chronic subchorionic bleeds beginning at 6 weeks gestation. At 19 weeks, my water broke. And this is a time when a baby is practicing breathing with amniotic fluid, but I didn't have any. So we were told the baby's lungs might become stiff and brittle, which would be very dangerous if my pregnancy was going to continue. I was asked if I wanted to terminate my pregnancy at least 3 times by 3 separate doctors over a span of 2 months. And during that time, I filled my journal with page after tearful page of fear and anxiety. I couldn't bring myself to terminate after I'd felt those wonderful flutterings of life. Intrusive thoughts found their way onto the pages too. I thought I was selfish for wanting to have a child who might face challenges. I wondered if I was being punished for defying Mother Nature, since half of all women whose water breaks early go into labor, and of them, 50% happen within the following 24 hours. And for me, it had been over 2 weeks. So was I taunting fate? I also questioned what I had done to cause this. I listed every possible action I could think of, but then I stopped myself and I stopped beating myself up. And I listed every counter argument in an effort to try and quiet the brain weasels that were having a party in my brain. At 26 weeks and 6 days gestation, Torin was born. We started family life with a stressed father who'd been awake for almost 24 hours, a mother who'd been whisked away for post-delivery complications, and a tiny boy whose first cry might have been his last. I also wrote a blog because I couldn't relive the trauma that we were experiencing when I spoke to every well-meaning person that I spoke to. The next day, Torin lost a chunk of his body weight and he looked like a skeleton with a heartbeat. 5 days later, he was diagnosed with 2 severe brain bleeds, one on each side of his head. And then overnight, his blood pressure plummeted. The NICU team suspected he had an infection that was going to kill him. In less than 24 hours, we had been asked twice if we wanted to pull his life support, and it wouldn't be the last time. That day, I couldn't write. It was too hard. I was too afraid of the words which would appear and which ones would not. All I could manage to say was, we arrived today to find out our little man had a suspected infection. He is a critically ill little boy. I cannot write. I am so numb. But this raises the question, if it's so painful to relive the experience by describing it, then why write anything at all? Well, that brings me to today's talk. Living a medicalized life looks different for everyone, but many of us feel marginalized because there are few people in our lives who truly understand what we're going through. Typical parents aren't forced to trade off socializing in baby groups for therapeutic appointments. They don't have to worry about accessibility and inclusion, and they certainly don't have to think about life and death situations. One early journal entry I wrote clearly illustrates what my life was like. This morning, it's off to the farmer's market with Bruce and Torin to capture a sense of normality before the upcoming neurosurgeon's visit, which I suspect may have him back in the hospital for surgery. Social isolation might extend to our children as well. As Torin got older, invitations to socialize stopped coming despite all of our groundwork to help him make friends. His grade 4 teacher told me that he spent his time alone. Sorry, it takes a moment, right? One of the questions that I hate being asked when Torin is hospitalized is, how are you today? Because the social expectation of that question is a positive answer. I don't like saying I'm good when I'm truly not. And responding that way further isolates me and reinforces that sense of my life being pushed to the margins. Also, as parents whose lives are defined by being our children's advocates, it may be we don't feel like the center of our own lives. Journaling is a moment to create a sanctuary about us, even if we're writing about our children. You can focus on yourself and talk about your day and your feelings. This doesn't mean that we're egocentric or that our children aren't the most important people in our lives. We're giving ourselves substance in a world where we feel like we're lost in the periphery. If it helps, use writing prompts like these to help write what about you experienced and particularly how it affected you. Sometimes you can take these prompts and use them as is, or they just naturally, after a while, become part of how you write. Language is deeply intertwined with our thought processes. The act of putting feelings into words clarifies and validates those feelings, which may allow us to gain new perspectives, or at the very least, reflect on what's happening inside of us. How many of us have spoken with someone who unintentionally says something dismissive, like, well, at least he's still alive, or, but he's doing so well. My other favorite is being offered unsolicited and completely unhelpful advice. Society trains us to be polite and say thank you, to pretend that we're going to take that under advisement. Or if we dare to push back and tell a person to mind their own business, we're being slapped with a disparaging label. Torin had a shunt, which is tubing, installed for hydrocephalus on June 10th, the day he was supposed to be born. It failed a week later, on the day we were supposed to go home. That following October, we had a Thanksgiving party because I never had a baby shower or a homecoming. The next day, I was drying his head after his first mom and baby swim, and I felt the tubing under his skin instead of in his skull where it belongs. Back in Sick Kids, I journaled that I was planning his funeral, and there was nobody I could tell, not even my husband. I eventually told one person who had also been through a situation like mine when I felt brave enough to, and she suggested that perhaps I felt this way because I'm a planner and I was preparing for every worst inevitable outcome. And that's actually what I had been doing in my journal to start with. Remember, there is no right or wrong way to feel, especially when you're journaling about your feelings. Journaling allows you to identify your needs, even in the smallest ways that you can achieve it. It's where you celebrate your resilience, what you've been through, how you managed to get through your day. And each small accomplishment, as Jen said, doesn't have to be a huge deal. It can be something very, very simple, like your baby managed to latch properly. In a journal, you only need to satisfy yourself. You don't have to worry about how you say, what you say, or to whom you're saying it, because it's only for you. And this leads me to the next point. External validation is the pat on the back that we get from others. Internal validation is our self-approval that we use to build self-worth. A healthy balance of both is important, but without a strong sense of internal validation, we give up control of our happiness to others. And that certainly doesn't bode well for families like ours who face uphill challenges. Women in particular are engendered to validate others and invalidate themselves. It's that much harder for us to recognize and accept our own feelings and experiences as valid, regardless of what other people say. So be compassionate to yourself when you are journaling, as you would a friend. In fact, I know one person who journals to themselves as if they're writing in the for a third person. You can't accept external validation without accepting yourself. And validating how you feel helps you build your knowledge and trust your instincts. But this doesn't mean that you judge yourself. You're not berating yourself for what you did wrong. You're highlighting where your needs are and what you need from other people. As I mentioned before, you can use the prompts if you find the words don't come to you easily. And it also provides a strong internal sense of buffering or protecting against intrusive thoughts and that sense of isolation. So let's talk about intrusive thoughts. Well, what are they? Well, these are those unwanted, unpleasant, and disruptive, what I call brain measles. Anxiety, shame, guilt, anger, and sometimes they're more dangerous, like harming our thoughts of harming ourselves or other people. Well, through journaling, we accept the presence of intrusive thoughts without judgment. And this helps reduce the feeling of being mentally unstable or bad if we have them. We recognize that they are common thoughts, but they don't necessarily reflect our true character. I like to think about journaling as trapping negativity on paper. We're able to observe patterns and triggers for the intrusive thoughts, and we can identify what increases their frequency or the situations that increase their intensity. And we use that awareness to develop strategies for reducing their impact or changing our responses to the triggers, like to the person who diminishes our trauma with statements like, oh, but you can't tell, or, but he's so much better now. When we journal, it challenges and reframes the intrusive thoughts because once, as I say, trapped, we can then write contradictory evidence, which cultivates more positive and realistic beliefs. And this is emotional processing. By exploring these emotions in a deep, present moment way, we gain a deeper understanding of their origins and we develop healthier coping mechanisms. We use the journals to brainstorm and manage, like how to manage intrusive thoughts. And perhaps it's something simple like which strategies for healthcare, like the ones Jennifer suggested, that you may come up with. Or is there something unique for you and your family? I used to say that everything happens for a reason. And in preparing for this talk, I even found a blog post in which I'd written that. But after everything we've been through, I no longer hold this belief. For me, a saying like that brushes off how I feel when I'm emotionally drowning. However, I do believe that people are capable of turning pain into purpose, just like I have. Keeping a journal privately let me work through my pain. And then once I'd done that, I was able to share on my blog to give a purpose of supporting other people through their pain. Sometimes writing everything down to exhaust how I felt would allow me to be more academic and focus on asking the questions and picking specialists' brains. Or maybe I'd have an epiphany about Torrance progress that I never thought would happen. Most importantly, it organized my thoughts about our complex situation. And I'd later return to those thoughts when there was so much going on that I'd forget what I most wanted to discuss. Remember, you're unique. Celebrate your accomplishments and write in a way that is for you. Be clear about what agency, what control you do have, and what choices you can make. And this agency includes things like what kind of boundaries you want to set and how to let others know what they are. I love holding fast to memories that are joyful, whether it's a success in the way I advocated for something, like stop telling me if I want to remove life support, or, okay, I will tell this one story. I wasn't sure if I was going to. When we moved Torrin into the crib from the isolette, he was having his first nappy change and he soiled his bed first thing. So, it was a funny moment and it's something that I wrote about and will always return to bring myself the smile. Finally, you can turn your pain into purpose and growth, as I've said, and you can also use the journaling to help you find your own voice. We've talked a lot about self-care, and journaling itself is a form of self-care. But there's also science to back this up. Psychoneuroimmunologist, with big mouthful, Robert Ader showed that the chemistry of behavior interacts with the chemistry of the immune system. During periods of depression, bereavement, or stress, those helpful cells created by our immune system to fight off infection and disease drop in number. Another researcher, Keith Petrie, led a team of scientists who demonstrated that expressive writing, so that emotional writing, helped improve the immune cell counts of HIV positive patients, and that in turn lowered their viral load. There's a psychologist by the name of James Pennebaker who coined the term emotional disclosure therapy. And this is the process of writing about traumatic or stressful events in a way that organizes one's thoughts and emotions into a coherent narrative. And he argues that suppressing emotions, especially those related to traumatic and stressful experiences, have a detrimental effect on mental and physical health. In fact, in one of his studies, he had two groups of medical students, one who wrote about emotional and traumatic experiences and one who did not, for 15 minutes a day, 4 days in a row. The group who wrote about the emotional traumatic experiences actually displayed improvements in their overall physical and mental health and had fewer visits to a health center. Now, all science has its critics, and Pennebaker's disclosure therapy is no exception. Even the concept of catharsis has been debated for decades. And some people do become more entrenched in the rigidity of their thoughts, of their negative headspace, if they focus upon it by writing. But I would argue that for most of us, writing provides notable benefits. So I've mentioned about it's a safe outlet for expressing emotions, it's journaling is a safe outlet for expressing emotions that might be difficult to articulate verbally. And it allows for a release of those pent-up feelings. Writing down our feelings helps identify and understand them, which facilitates the recognition of patterns in emotional responses and the triggers. It helps us organize our thoughts and gain clarity on complex situations. And that allows us to have a more objective perspective on those emotional experiences, which then helps us create ways to have better emotional regulation. Writing about problems breaks down overwhelming issues into manageable steps, and the act of writing itself helps to organize thoughts and clarify. But it also is proven to show a better connection to help us between our handwriting and our brain patterns and our nerves that are made that then create stronger memories and a better record for recall. It is a way for us to have self-reflection, which is always important for personal growth. And most importantly, it is a way to increase our resilience. And this isn't just talking about, I wrote it down, I got it out of my system, but there's actually studies that demonstrate that the emotional brain center, the amygdala, which is where we have our fight or flight freeze response, its activity reduces when we write, but it goes up when we have stressful situations. So the corollary is, if we write, we can bring those feelings down and smooth them out, and then we can process better. And that processing helps with our ongoing resilience. And of course, my favorite reason for doing it is to revisit those joyful moments, because inherently people remember negativity. That's why we all hate watch American news right now, right? It's what we're drawn to. But it is, when it's on paper there, it's so much easier to revisit joy. And I'm going to give you again another example where I wrote, "But there's hope. Today, for the first time ever, Torrin got excited about seeing me. Normally speaking, he'll point out that a person has come home, but he doesn't get excited about it. He'll mimic the intonation of a person who's saying, 'Daddy's home,' but it's never done spontaneously. I happened to come home when the boys were out for a walk, and as I walked from the car to join them, Torrin jumped up and down. 'It's Mummy, it's Mummy!' Although Bruce told him that Mummy was coming, he didn't tell him to get excited or to jump up and down and call out for me. When Bruce let go of Torrin's hand, Torrin came towards me, but then he lost his focus and saw the umbrella that I was carrying. But it's a start." You might say, "Okay, I'm ready to start writing a journal, but Leslie, you're an author who's been writing her whole life. I'm not. I don't know what to write or how to write it or even how to start." Well, let's be honest. When you're in the middle of a crisis, and by that I mean when your typical daily struggle finds yet another new bottom, you may not have the heart to write, much less the time. I certainly didn't. And who among us can reliably find the perfect peaceful moment like this to journal? First of all, give yourself permission to take that moment out for you. Sometimes that's the hardest step. And secondly, you don't have to box yourself into a routine that is inflexible, because when life demands more from you than usual, feeling bad that you didn't accomplish something good for you only adds to your stress. During times of crisis, I would only keep a record of factual details: how many needle pokes, the counting number of scans and tests, recording the names of doctors and nurses because I wouldn't know who to compliment or complain about later on. Despite the power they had over my son's life, I would forget their name. So I found I had to carve out time and create micro routines. So this might be writing a text to myself while I was waiting in a doctor's office, or getting up 10 minutes earlier than everybody else to have my cup of tea in quiet and a moment to myself with my journal. Don't tell my husband this, but I've also hidden the bathroom, complaining I had constipation when I was actually journaling. I've scribbled notes in our calendar of appointments, and I've also recorded a text to voice and sent it to myself while I was driving. When you have an opportunity to write pen and paper, reward yourself with the tactile senses. I collect notebooks just for this purpose, and the dollar store is full of great ones. I love the sayings on the covers as well. You can free write to start, just bleh, whatever comes out of your mind. And then when you're more comfortable, you can progress to what's called expressive writing. And you can use words for causality, insight, intention, and introspection. And by these, I mean things like, I understand, I plan to, I am going to evaluate, or I assess that. Therefore, things like that. Writing in the current moment as if it's actually happening also is a sporting psychology trick to train your brain like it's actually happening right then and there. If you include sensory details related to your 5 sentences, it's a way to cause psychological grounding to keep you in that moment and stop thoughts from becoming brain weasels. I mentioned, I think, about writing I statements. Write about how you feel about something and how you are the center of that thought, rather than what other people have said, and make it about them. This further validates you, your intentions, and your feelings. And be kind to yourself. Like I said, writing isn't about judging. It's not about berating yourself for what did or didn't happen, for what you think you're guilty of. Today, I'm including a PDF of writing prompts with this presentation to help you find a path to self-expression if you need to. And remember, journaling isn't about creating perfect prose. It's about honest expression and introspection. Your journal is your sanctuary, a place to process and heal, a tool to find the strength you'll need to wield in your complicated life. Now, I know that not everyone can physically use pen and paper, and there are many different ways to express ourselves. Each type of expression carries its own meaning and personal value. Some people use painting or poetry. Some do pottery. When we were in the ICU, it was, before the days of everyone having a high-res phone in their pocket, in the camera in their pocket. So I would use my handheld Nikon camera to take a picture of everything. But interestingly, our brains have a special relationship with pen and paper. Handwriting is a tactile and kinesthetic experience. Writing engages our brains in a way that a photograph or keyboard typing doesn't. In fact, if I can get a little technical for a moment, there are studies that have been done which measure electrical activity in the brain. And those studies revealed that there was increased activity and connectivity among students who were note-taking using pen and paper than those who were using some other digital means. One of the things that I find I do more when I'm writing versus typing is I express myself in how much I use exclamation marks, how strongly I press the pen into the paper, and how many times I underline something because I'm really mad, really angry. This rather busy mind map demonstrates the many benefits of writing a journal. And while I'm not going to go over all of it now, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. I've just mentioned the tactile and kinesthetic experience, which enhances the processing of language. But also, writing itself forces us to slow down because we cannot write as fast as we think. In fact, when I'm particularly stressed and I don't even realize it, my words do not come out properly. I'm writing words ahead of what I'm actually supposed to be writing in my sentence. And so that's an indicator to me that life is getting a little too complicated. Writing clarifies thoughts and boosts our memory, because there have been studies that have been shown that the encoding of long-term memory is reinforced by handwriting. It is also a very personalized expression, which adds a layer of authenticity and emotional connection, which further validates you and puts you at the center of everything. It is grounding and provides a moment of mindfulness in a tangible way that perhaps other methods can't do. I have a hard time meditating unless it's guided meditation because my brain just does not stop thinking. Finally, handwriting is less distracting than using a digital tool. There is no pop-up notifications. Of course, you have to set your phone aside and turn it off and so on, but it is obviously less intrusive than a digital tool. I just do want to point out, of course, that journaling is not a substitute for professional treatment. And if thoughts are intrusive and they're severe or they significantly impact your life, it's critical to seek professional help from a therapist or a mental health professional. or a doctor. If you ever feel like hurting yourself or others at any time, call 911 and seek immediate medical and mental health attention. Sometime after I left Mount Sinai, I became a parent coach. And by sharing our story online and by then connecting with that online community, and at their request, really wrote a book about it. I've connected with mothers and children who have had, mothers of children who have had brain bleeds and hydrocephalus or worse. And I'm still in touch with many of them, and I'm blessed to call many of them friends. So Growing a Rainbow is the book that I wrote in 2014, and I wrote it as essentially a first person perspective because there wasn't that much material at the time for parents like myself who didn't want the clinical perspective, who didn't want a religious perspective. They just wanted a lived experience to say, is what I'm experiencing something somebody else has gone through, and is it okay for me to feel the same way? This is a raw and sometimes painful, but heartfelt reflection of the newly minted Donaldson family, our fears, our joys, and of course, Torrance' marvelous spirit. I was able to raise $2,500 for the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation through sales of the book, and I'm very honored to have partnered with Glucksing Lawyers today to be able to present you with the opportunity to have more copies. So just in summary, medicalized life is a marginal life. Journaling is an opportunity to validate yourself and not rely on other people to make you feel worthy. It legitimizes how you feel, and it allows you to be honest with how you feel. You can take those negative thoughts, trap them on paper, and then deal with them, which also gives you a sense of control over what is uncontrollable in your life. And you can return to your emotional release and to your happy memories as a part of your self-care. And all of this not only improves your resilience to deal with the unexpected life that you have, but it also helps you and me and everyone here connect to the people who do understand us and the life we're going through. Thank you very much. And thank you again for taking a moment for yourself today.
Thank you so much, Leslie. I mean, I have to say, I love the effects of having you speak in your presentation. I have to figure that out. But I just wanted to, again, a heartfelt thank you for, I know these are so hard to condense in small chunks, and, there's so much more wisdom there for you to share. And I'm grateful for you doing that. And I really wish that I, looking back, had journaled. I really do. I look back at, so many experiences that people ask me about now, and I have to try to recall it. And just the reminders of, those small milestones or those little pieces of triumphs and just things like that, I have a hard time recalling now. And so I really wish that I had have done that. And I hope it's not too late, because I think there's still a lot for me to capture. And it's just a reminder that I do need to start journaling. And I know there's other people that are participating today that I know journal, and they do share those with their broader communities and how helpful those are. So this was just another, I think, reminder for me that I really do need to start doing this. And thank you so much. And I hope that people who will be watching this video after will get some of those tips and tricks on what they need to be doing to start journaling. So thank you again so much, Leslie.
Oh, you're more than welcome. And I apologize. I don't know what's happening to my video now. I have a feeling it's stuck in the PowerPoint presentation.
That's you're like stuck in the metaverse.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Somewhere.
No worries at all. What we'll do, so thank you again so much. So what we'll do is just in the we are going to be moving to our next speaker. So really quickly, Leslie, we have 40 of Leslie's books. We are not going to do 40 on the wheel. We've done a pre-draw, and so we'll make sure that those people are notified. And I just think, in the effort of transparency, we're just going to quickly pick 5 additional names, and then we'll move into our next speaker. So like I said, if you have been the recipient of one of these book giveaways, we will absolutely be reaching out to you to get your contact information so that we can go ahead and share those. Yep, so Ariana. Hi, Kate. Okay. Great. So just 3 more. I always think it's fun when you get to win something when you're participating in an event. And something super helpful. And this will be part of self-care because now people will be getting a copy of a book that they'll have to carve out time to spend time reading. So that is an added bonus of this giveaway. All right, and we have 2 more. Great. Perfect, Rebecca, and then 1 more. Perfect. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll bring up our next slide. All right, so I don't know what happened to our last winner, though. We'll make sure that we let everybody know. So I am going to mute myself and take off mine and over to Jan to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Brenda. So I loved hearing, Leslie, that some of the proceeds of your book went to the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. I was fortunate enough to get to meet Kate through that organization where I'm on the board. I'm the current chair of the board. And, you know, shameless plug for CPBF. So if there are any parents here today that are, you know, raising premature baby, who've had a child in the NICU, it's an amazing organization. If any of you have the opportunity to volunteer, get involved, we're always looking for people to do that. And this year is our first year we're having a gala to support the organization. So I would love to see any and all of you get involved. It's fantastic. So moving to Kate, as I said, I was fortunate enough to get to briefly work with Kate when I first joined the board. Kate is a registered psychotherapist in Toronto. She's been inspired by her own experiences with kids in the NICU. She's worked with babies, parents, and families for more than 12 years as a family support specialist. She's traveled all over the world, educating parents and clinicians on family-centered care, trauma-informed practices. Her workshops focus on cultivating attachment and relationships and creating emotion-friendly homes and workplaces for these families. In her private practice, she supports individuals and couples experiencing infertility, high-risk pregnancy, NICU hospitalizations, and bereavement. She helps to manage Canada's largest support community for NICU families. She has a degree from the McGill University and Oise, completing her psychotherapy training at the Toronto Institute for Relational Psychotherapy, and has studied many different modalities. She also, like other speakers, is a writer, and I didn't know this, Kate, but big congratulations coming because her book, Something to Hold On To, is being published in 2026. So I will turn it over to Kate. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you. It's so completely my pleasure. And I'm just so happy to be with you. I want to say thanks to the Glucksine team for all the support you give this community. And also a thank you to Jen and Jennifer and Leslie for your words of wisdom. I just feel so much alignment between all of us today. I feel like I've learned so much. It's not even noon, you know, it's a great day. And of course, we have Fabiana and Brenda to look forward to. So feeling very grateful. And so for my part today, I decided to speak without slides. I kind of wanted to give this talk a conversational feel, but I did prepare a handout for you. So if you don't feel like taking notes, if you just want to listen, all the concrete information I'm sharing is going to be in that handout. You may have received it or you'll be getting it after the talk. I mean, Jennifer did and Leslie did such a beautiful job talking about the nervous system and how to regulate. I do want to touch on it a little bit more because it's just so important. And then talk about 2 different models of therapy that I think are really great for parents, share a couple of tools from one model in particular, and then time for questions at the end. And so just 1 minute to share a little bit about myself and why I'm here today. My parents' story started almost exactly 20 years ago. So on this date in 2005, I was expecting my first baby and I thought all was well with the world. And then shortly thereafter, I ended up having a 1-pound baby at about 25 weeks. And all of our lives changed in a heartbeat. And I'm sure many of you can relate to this. One day your life is like this, and one day your life is like that. We spent the summer of 2005 at Women's College, now Sunnybrook, and also at Sick Kids, discharged home in September. 2 years later, I had another preemie at Mount Sinai, this time whopping 3-pound baby. And so, 2007, I was back at home with 2 premature babies, finally at home, but awash in anxiety and fear and up to my neck in appointments and service navigation. And again, I bet that sounds familiar to many of you. So in 2010, I was in search of meaning, I guess, and maybe healing. And I joined Sunnybrook as an NICU family support specialist. And I worked there for the next 12 years. And I loved it, working with families, staff members. It was an incredible experience and challenging, as I'm sure you can imagine. And somewhere along the way, I decided that I wanted to be a psychotherapist. I went back to school, almost, in not quite in my 50s, but almost in my 50s. And I opened my own practice in 2019. And I was also lucky enough, as we've noted, to work closely with the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. I was part of the COVID Care Project, which was so dear to my heart, delivering mental health support to NICU families across the country. Because of course, as you remember, everything shut down over COVID, over the pandemic, and there really wasn't anything for parents. So because of these experiences, my own experience as a parent, and then as a support worker, engaging with NICU families and follow-up clinic families, I think I've learned a lot along the way about how challenging these experiences can be. And so I want to share some thoughts with you about what I think helps and how to find that help. So building that toolbox together, you all have toolboxes already full of strategies, but I think probably a lot of the strategies are about taking care of other people. So right now, I just really want to focus on you and what goes in your toolbox. Jennifer and Leslie have already given us some incredible techniques, so I'll reinforce in some of those points and then add some thoughts as well. And so first off, I do think I was being a little snarky with the title of my talk. I have nothing against bath bombs or box breathing. Both of those are wonderful things to have in your toolkits. Part of why I said this, and I think when somebody asked a question or made a comment related to this earlier, I think parents whose kids have complex issues were often given advice that's very well-meaning, but it really misses the mark, and people don't understand sometimes what we're dealing with, or they can be uncomfortable with our pain, with our reality, and they kind of want to make it go away. They want to solve our problems for us. And that can leave us feeling very unseen, misunderstood, unheard. And of course, all of that makes us feel unsafe, right? Because if you cannot make somebody see you or hear you, how do you ensure that you're safe, right? If no one hears you shouting fire, is anyone going to come help, right? So when our deep pain is met with surface solutions, it can feel really terrible, and it can lead us to reject strategies or tools that don't necessarily solve our problems, but could help us recalibrate, right? So let's name and acknowledge that when you're a parent of a child with disabilities or complex needs, you're going to be spending a good chunk of your time, perhaps from even before your child is born, in environments that are very difficult to navigate and that are not set up for you. There's a therapeutic model called dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, you may have heard of. And in DBT, they would call these invalidating environments, right? Hospitals can be invalidating environments, generally not places where people feel comfortable, regulated, at ease. Even in hospitals with very caring staff members, this is not about the people who work in them. But there are rules and practices that are not aligned with human needs, right? Schools can be invalidating environments for many students, parents, and teachers. They're systems that are set up to serve generic needs, but they struggle to serve specific needs, to meet specific needs. So as human beings, when we're put in these invalidating environments, our nervous systems, we've talked a lot about nervous systems today, and it's for a good reason, because it's really important. Some of this will get revved up to the upper register of our nervous system and will kind of buzz around at the top. Some of us will shut right down and kind of bounce around on the bottom. And neither place feels particularly good, whether we're revved up or shut down. And we often blame ourselves for our responses. We don't always make the link between our environment and these responses that we're experiencing. So I say all of this because if we accept that this is true, that we as parents are going to be engaging with invalidating environments a large chunk of the time, and that this is going to show up in our systems, in our bodies, in our moods, then it becomes clearer that we need to befriend our own systems, get very curious about them, and learn about what they need, what our specific system needs. And I think Jennifer made that point beautifully earlier. We're all very different. There's not going to be one solution that suits everybody. Now, we might find if we tend to shut down, certain kinds of gentle movement, the cross-body movement that was talked about earlier, that might help us move out of shutdown. Getting outside, taking a walk, energetic breath practices can be really helpful. If we tend to be, rever uppers who exist at the top of our nervous system, we might benefit from fidgeting, fidget toys, not just for kids, right? That's what this bracelet's for. We can always look at the sky, we can look at clouds, we can count cars driving down the street. This is where box breathing might come in, right? The in-breath, hold, out-breath, hold. So all of these strategies, they don't solve our problems. They're not meant to. They're not meant to make them go away. They buy us a little wiggle room, right? And they help us get back towards that zone of tolerance. They give us time and space. And so let's add those tools to the toolbox, add them to the wonderful tools we've heard about today. And now, we think we found what works for us. We've opened up a bit of psychological space for ourselves. Now, what do we do with that in service of our own well-being? And so this is where I'd like to explore a couple of therapy models now, because I think therapy can be so transformative, and I think its role is often misunderstood. So I used to think that therapy was for when you were in deep, deep crisis, right? When something was blowing up or you've been diagnosed with a mental health disorder. And of course, it can be helpful in those moments, right? It can be a lifeline. And I would say for me, therapy has been just as valuable in quieter moments. It's through regular therapy that I've been able to develop skills and practices that translate into making everyday life feel a bit more spacious, a bit different, flexible, a bit more joyful. And I think it's helped keep my relationships and my life feel more in balance, right? And when you start thinking about therapy, you probably already know there are so many different types of therapy, and it can feel very dizzying, trying to wade your way through all the choices. Some therapies are really well known, some are more emerging. Many of you may have heard of a type of therapy called CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy. Some resources about that in the handout. Today, I want to focus on something that's sort of adjacent, sort of a next door neighbor to CBT, called acceptance commitment therapy, also known as ACT. This is the therapy that I encountered when I was working in the NICU, and it's what made me want to be a therapist. It helped me see that I was treating my pain as an enemy that I wanted to get rid of. And of course, that's a very reasonable human thing to do. It's just also not possible, right? That's the acceptance part of ACT. And I think Jennifer, explored this concept beautifully in her talk. Life will be difficult, right? Part of living a good life, a meaningful life, is that you will encounter pain. And when we try to avoid that pain or exile it or medicate it away with distraction, sometimes we cause ourselves more pain, right? So an example of this might be, let's say I've had a terrible day at work and I'm really cranky. I come home and somebody's annoying me. I might get snappy, right? My feeling will show up in what I do. And then I'm going to have a feeling about that. I might feel guilty, right? And then I'm feeling guilty, so I might isolate myself. And then I'm going to feel lonely, right? So as human beings, we're often pinging and ponging between having a feeling, doing something to get rid of it, having a feeling about that, and so on. And it's sort of like being on an emotional hamster wheel. So how do we get off the emotional hamster wheel? ACT offers us lots of tools. There's one called the matrix, another called the choice point. But both of those concepts come down to a sort of central idea. So if we take a moment and we ground ourselves in what is truly important to us, who and what is important, our most cherished values, that would be the first step, right? Who and what is important to us. And we set that as our North Star. And then we acknowledge and name what we're feeling, what it feels like. So I'm worried and I feel that in my chest. I'm sad. It feels like when I first got the diagnosis from our doctor. And we're just observing, right? Not judging anything that we're noticing. And then we ask ourselves, so what do I feel like doing next? And does it feel like I'm moving towards what's important to me or away from it, right? Let me give you a little example sort of in action. So let's say I identify in this moment, my health is really important to me. And let's say I've signed up for a class. This is a true story, by the way. And I go to the class and maybe, I'm not very good at it. I can sort of see everyone in it and they're very good at it. And I'm going to have a feeling about this. I might feel shy. It might remind me of a grade 12 phys ed, which is not my best moment. So if I don't stop myself for a second, give myself an opportunity to take a breath, I might just react to those feelings. And, what might I do? I might run away. I might go to the back and not try very hard, get caught up in those feelings. If I give myself a moment, remember what is important to me, use some of the strategies that we've been given today, other more values-based choices might open up, right? I might decide to stay. I might decide to ask for some help, right? So in acceptance commitment therapy, we often talk about bold moves, not big moves necessarily, but just bold moves, values-based moves. These are choices that we intentionally move towards because they feel like values moves to us. This is the acceptance and validation and choosing to move towards that Jennifer talked about earlier, right? So there's another ACT tool that I also want to mention today. It's called the bullseye diagram. And it's also included in your handout. And what I love about this tool is it helps us keep track over time because, as parents, we can get so embedded in what's going on, with our children's lives and the world around us and and we often forget to stop and take stock of how we're doing, right? So I'm just going to briefly sketch out how we can use this tool. So first, you'll be drawing a circular bullseye or target and maybe 4 or 5 rings, and you'll draw lines across the middle. So you have 4 quarters. And you're going to label each quarter as a domain of life that matters to you. And you get to choose. So we could say, work or education, or relationships / family, fun, personal growth. There's no right or wrong here. If there are other big categories that are important to you, feel free to go up to 6. I wouldn't have more than 6 because it can get kind of complicated. But once you've got your segments, your domains of life identified, you're going to rank them in terms of what's most important to you, right? Not by saying something is, 4th on the list or 6th. We're not saying it's not important. We're just saying it's the least important right now. Not everything can be the most important thing at once, right? So we go through this, we rank our choices, our domains. And then we start thinking, what have I been doing like this week? What actions have I taken? What choices have I made over the course of a week? And so I look at a particular domain, have I done anything in service of this over this week? And if I have, I'm going to put an X right to the center of the bullseye. And if I haven't, no judgment, I'm just noticing. I might put that X further, towards the outside of the bullseye. Now, if a domain is not the most important thing to you, it doesn't really matter where that X lines up. If a domain is really important to you, treat it as a call to action or an invitation, right? Not a judgment, but it's a call to action. What values move could I commit to? What promise can I make and keep to myself over the next week related to this area of life, right? And this way you can keep track, you can have these sheets, you can put them in a journal and revisit. Is this still what's most important to me? Has that shifted? There was a time in my life when education was super important. Now maybe that's less so. Now maybe it's a bit more about personal growth. There's no right or wrong. It's very personal, but am I paying attention? And this is a wonderful tool to help us pay attention to ourselves. Okay, so that's a little taste of ACT. I want to describe, we've talked a lot about trauma today, so I want to just take a couple minutes to describe another model called EMDR, which is especially effective for people who've experienced traumatic events. So, flashbacks, phobias, if you've ever experienced these sorts of, if certain places are really hard for you to go to, you notice yourself really avoiding certain activities because of high anxiety around them, EMDR might be a great fit for you. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And the theory behind it is that usually our brain sort of files away events of the day during REM sleep. I think Inside Out, that wonderful movie, sort of talked about that. And if something traumatic happens, our brain kind of keeps that file handy. It doesn't file it away. It's sort of, I guess that's in service of protection, right? So that, we learn to not touch fires, we run away from lions, that sort of thing. But if it's a traumatic memory that's unlikely to repeat, or if our response to it is getting in the way of daily living, that's where EMDR comes in. It helps us file away these memories where they belong. And so the classic EMDR uses eye movements where you might follow your therapist's fingers. This is where Jennifer demonstrated the butterfly tap. So EMDR therapists will use this or other kinds of tapping, any kind of bilateral movement. And therapists will help us revisit these traumatic moments and help our brain file them away where they belong. You don't forget the memories. They just don't have the power over us that they used to. So I have to admit, I did the training a few years ago, and I was kind of skeptical. I was like, okay, this sounds really interesting. I just don't get how it works. I was doing the training online, and it just sounded so strange to me. It's like, what? I just move my eyes and in the practicum, because in training, you often practice the skills together with other therapists. And so I chose some anxiety that I feel around driving to practice on. And while I was practicing, while I was trying it, I was still skeptical. I wondered, what am I doing here? Spending these hours doing this thing. And so even though I was not sold on it and I didn't think I was doing it right, whatever that meant, it ended up still working for me. Something that was very distressing for me and was sort of at a 6 out of 10 on a distress scale went right down to a 0. And that was so interesting for me. So if this is something that resonates with you, if you're holding some traumatic experiences, a therapy like EMDR, there's also a kind of sister therapy to that called brain spotting, that might be really valuable for you. And of course, there's so many other models that we don't have time to talk about today. Internal family systems, which is a great way of integrating different parts of self, the positive psychology models that Jennifer shared, DBT, which I talked about earlier, CBT, there's some great resources via the Ontario government that are free. And so I encourage you to, I put some links in the handout, but I encourage you to look those up. And you might look for more work on the nervous system, you might look to something like polyvagal theory or somatic experiencing, right? What I do want to say, and this, I'll sort of end with this, what's more important than any therapeutic model is the relationship that you have with your therapist, right? Most therapists will do free consults, so do take the time to shop around a bit. If you don't feel safe and good with the therapist, then move on. It's not you, it's the fit, right? The research is clear that a good therapeutic relationship is more important, really, than the therapeutic model. So fit is everything. Most therapy models will have associations to help you find someone. Psychology Today is a way to find a therapist. You can search by, models and location and all of that. For lower cost therapy in Ontario, there's a wonderful place called Hard Feelings, which is excellent and can connect you with somebody. So yes, and there's a million more things I would love to share with you, but maybe right now is a good time to hit pause and we can check in and see if anybody has any questions.
Let me just take a look, Kate. I think we're all enthralled with what you're saying. I don't see any there. I was grateful when you mentioned about accessing resources that are covered by the government. I think there's so many of these pieces when we talk about access to assistance that are difficult to get if people don't have benefits or they don't have the means to support that. So I think that's super important. I always think about that when people are presenting on a number of different options to pursue therapy interventions, but can't access them. So I think that is super helpful. So like I said, I don't see, if you want to keep going, Kate, if you have a few more minutes of things you want to talk about, please go because I don't see any questions. So
okay, awesome. Well,
yes.
Can I share, then I would love to share one technique.
Yeah.
This is drawn from EMDR, and I think it's called the calm place visualization, right? So in EMDR and in other types of therapy, we do a lot of resourcing. So we want to do a lot of taking care of the system so that people can do the tough work of therapy, because EMDR can be emotionally pretty tough. And so, and this is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 that you talked about earlier, Brenda, this might resonate a bit with you because of this. So with the calm place, when I'm helping people develop this visualization or this tool really that they can use, the first thing I will do is I will ask people to imagine a place where they feel genuinely very, very calm. And this is often an imaginary place, right? Sometimes people say, oh, the family cottage. And then it turns out that everyone's fighting about the family cottage. So we want a place that is genuinely very calm and peaceful, right? So some people imagine themselves on a beach. Some people imagine themselves in the mountains. I imagine a screened-in porch, right? And then I'm going to really encourage people to kind of go through their senses, right? So look around with your mind's eye. What do you see, right? So I might see the trees. I might see in the wood deck. I might see, if I'm at the ocean, I might see beautiful sand, wonderful blue water, clouds in the sky. Then what do I hear? Do I hear the wind? Do I hear bird song? Do I hear nothing? Do I hear beautiful silence? Do I hear nobody asking me for anything? But that might be kind of nice. What do I smell? Can I smell anything? Whether it's that wonderful smell that you smell at the beach, you know, of the salty ocean, or maybe I'm holding a wonderful cup of coffee and I can smell that, right? So we just go through, I might put my hands down, I might imagine like picking up some of that sand and letting it go through my hands. I might imagine a taste. So I'm tasting that coffee or a Mai Tai, you know, no judging. Whatever feels restful, peaceful, calming to me, right? And so I create this calm place. I go through my senses and I really let myself spend some time there. And this is one of those things when I'm working with people, I really want people, and I do this myself, practice this, right? Because sometimes we have a thought about something and then we only turn to it in a moment of crisis, but you know, we haven't developed a habit around it. So we might say, you know, when you're going to bed, just take 2 minutes and just think about your calm place and check in, right? How does it look? You know, what are you smelling? What are you seeing today? Practice, use it so that it will be available for you in these difficult moments. And so I find, you know, I have my calm place, my screened-in porch, very big cup of coffee, and it's available to me now. So if I'm on the TTC or if I'm a little anxious before a talk because these amazing talks have gone before, and I'm like, I can take a second and I can go there. Doctors' waiting rooms, right? Hospital environments, you know, and this is where you can also amplify the sort of calming or regulating benefits of this by adding that cross-body movement that Jennifer talked about earlier, right? So I'm imagining, you know, my beautiful place, my calm place, and I can feel my system come to rest, right? So I would really encourage all of you, come up with your own calm place. Everybody's is going to be different. Give it a little name, you know. And this is a place you don't have to buy tickets, you don't have to deal with customs, you don't have to, you know, you don't have to pack. You can go there anytime you want, right? It's a really, really wonderful technique. So yeah, have fun visiting your calm places.
I know that we're probably going to go over by a couple of minutes because we do have another speaker, but that's okay because I think it's important, and I think if anyone needs to go, they can go. And we do have a couple of comments in the chat that I want, or in the Q&A that I want to mention really quickly. But Kate, what I do want to say is I think what I really hope that some people take away from today is that, like, I think about your example there, and that is such an easy one to implement and have in my toolbox. Again, like my 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 that I practice religiously, or my walking away and counting to 10 before. But I think, you know, I really want I feel like sometimes I think sometimes there's this thing like, that's hokey, or that's, and I really hope that we are able to get past some of those thoughts today, because at the end of the day, we are burning out and we do need these strategies. And what many of us are going through and encountering on a daily basis is not going to go away. A lot of us are going to have this for longevity. And so I do think that we need to find these pieces. And this is an easy one. It doesn't cost you any money. You can do it anywhere that you are. It can be a real or imagined place. And so, you know, how do we get through those barriers in our brain to,
Yeah.
it's okay to embrace these ideas that may be, you know, I'm doing this hokey, but that might be, but it's not. It's a practical way of giving yourself a moment to be in that place and into so I hope that, you know, people can take these today and actually, I hope they not only resonate with them, but they can say, you know what, okay, I'm going to take this, I'm going to do this for a minute, I'm going to give it a chance, and just, you know, see if it works for them. And that's an easy one. So that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just clicked into the
Yes.
question. So Roxanne, a suggestion for you, moving meditation, right? So this is where something like Tai Chi or a walking meditation. I also struggle with mindfulness, like traditional mindfulness, like sitting. I just sit and I'm just like, you know, the monkey mind, a big time. I still try. I'm also very happy being quote unquote bad at meditation. But something like a walking meditation works better for me, or even bringing a meditative quality, a mindful quality to tasks that we have to do, right? So anything with a sensory component to it, like washing dishes, just slowing down, letting yourself really feel this, you know, the smell the soap, feel the hot water over your hands, you know, what have you. But you can bring that mindful quality to a lot of everyday tasks. And that might be how we fit it in. There's no perfect, there's just what works for us, right? But I really hear you on that, because it's like, oh, you know, sometimes mindfulness does not feel that fun. Sorry.
So I did say another one quickly, okay, because I don't want to dismiss that we have questions. So thank you for another one is how, so a question would be, there's so many suggestions and so many ideas. We just talked about this, but when life is so busy, I never remember to try any of these. And I have tried so many of these ideas with therapy, but the follow through and continuation is an issue because again, life gets busy.
Yeah.
How would Kate suggest remind ourselves concepts and tricks?
So I so appreciate this because yes, it's just an example of how sometimes I imagine, we're all carrying these. I think back to when I was a waitress. I was a terrible waitress, I have to say. And but you'd have like a tray and it was just crowded, so crowded with like, and then somebody would just try and get one more glass in there, and no, there's just no room. So what I would suggest is that keeping something very, very small. I find that it works best if a practice that I'm trying out, I try and do it first thing in the morning because I kind of find that that's the only part of my life that isn't kind of colonized by everybody else and everything else. And I'm talking like a small move, whether it's standing up and doing like a little bit of stretching or whether it's taking 5 minutes to do a bit of journaling. But if I start my day with that, that's the time that I usually have free, we'll call it that. And then you feel so virtuous if you do something first of the day, you can just ride that wave for a really long time. So, but I want to acknowledge the truth of what you're saying, that it's really hard when you're the one holding everything up. You're like, I mean, carrying everything. It's hard to make time for yourself. It's hard to make and keep these promises. And that's why I really encourage that. And I think Jennifer said that, I think Leslie said that we start small. We don't try like a whole program. We're just like, let's pick one small experiment. It may not work first, then we let it go. And that's totally okay. Yeah.
I've taken pictures of some of the other questions. So what I think I'm going to do, Kate, there's a couple more that I might send to you. No, I
Yes.
will send to you. And perhaps you can craft a really quick response. And what we'll do is we'll include that in the mailer that goes out, or I can
Amazing.
include those in the YouTube notes to say these were some questions that came in that we have some answers for. So because I
Yes.
do want to make sure that we can get to our last speaker.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm so grateful for you as always. And I'm so happy that you were able to participate today. And just the way these worlds all come together, and we never know it when we connect, how we may find ourselves back together again in some capacity, and here we are. So thank you so much. We are going to do another quick giveaway. I'm just going to promote our next speaker to panelists. These are going to be for gift cards. So these next 4 giveaways that we're going to do really quickly are going to be for gift cards. So I'll just do these. And again, I apologize, we're going over time, but these are so important. These conversations are so important. So 2 more, I think we're giving 4 in total. Holly, and then 1 more. And thank you to Arcade, who is behind the scenes running these wheels. Great. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So we're just going to transition over and get our slide ready so I can introduce our next speaker, who I feel like I have introduced many times, my dear friend, Fabiana. Fabi, thank you so much for joining us today. And for anyone who does not know you, I'm just going to read a little bit about Fabi's bio. We've mentioned her a couple times today, but Fabiana is a mother, advocate, and storyteller who has dedicated her journey to supporting families of preterm babies. As the executive director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, she uses her own experience to connect with and empower parents facing the challenges of the NICU and beyond. When her surviving son was later diagnosed with cerebral palsy, Fabiana's role as a mother and advocate deepened. She understands the fears, the questions, and the hopes that come with raising a child with complex needs. Through her work, she shares her story to remind parents that they are not alone. She believes that by supporting each other and working together, we can not only survive, but thrive. And she is a dear friend of mine. And I'm so grateful that you're here today, Fabi. So welcome. And Fabi's going to speak to us about thriving through adversity as a mother's journey.
Hi, Brenda. Thank you so much for the invitation. Very hard to follow all these amazing speakers, and some of them are my personal friends. I'm very grateful that I'm here today. So thank you. I will share a little bit of my journey and how, as Brenda said, how I continue to find joy and thrive through adversity, especially when in the reality that it's not easy, always show online. So today I really want to pull back the curtain, not just on the photos, but what is really looks like to live and parent through adversity for me. So we all see these pictures, those photos on social media, everyone is smiling, the kids look happy, and it all seems so effortless. But what we don't see is what happens behind the scenes. The worries, the sleepless nights, the fears, and the heartbreaks. Social media give us a highlight reel, but motherhood is not a highlight reel. And for us parents of neurodiverse children, it's a full, messy, emotional, exhausting, and beautiful journey. And that's what I want to talk about today, the story behind the pictures. I will share my personal story on how I've navigated the heartbreak and the hope of parenting through adversity, from the NICU to raising a child with special needs. My goal is to offer connection and maybe a bit of comfort. And I want you to know that you are not alone. So this is how it all began. When I found out I was pregnant with twins, I was overwhelmed, wondering how I would raise 3 children under the age of 3. Having gone through fertility treatment for years, I knew this was a real possibility, but I didn't think it would happen to me. Past the initial shock, I started to imagine matching outfits, shared birthdays, and a house full of chaos and love. But life had other plans. Mike was stillborn before reaching the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU, and Gabriel was born extremely premature at 26 weeks gestation, weighing only 2 pounds. I became a mother to one baby I couldn't take home, and another who would spend months in the NICU, and nothing prepares you for that. The NICU became our world. Beeping machines, daily setbacks, tiny wins. 5 months of living in limbo, trying to bond through plastic incubators and medical jargon. I had to learn quickly to advocate, to speak up, to trust my instincts. I wasn't just a mother. I was part of Gabriel's care team. I was in hospital 8-10 hours a day, attending medical rounds, making difficult decisions, pumping, attending educational sessions. But that's where I learned my first lesson, to stay present. I realized that in the NICU, things change very quickly. In one moment, everything seemed to be okay. The next, an entire team is rescuing my little baby. But by living in the present, in the now, I could celebrate what I had instead of thinking about what could happen. A lesson that I still carry to today. Because if you really think about it, now is all we have. And because we know that anything can happen in the next instant. Coming home was a different kind of challenge. We were out of the hospital, but the medical needs didn't stop. Gabriel came home on oxygen. His development was extremely delayed. I was a second-time mom. I knew something wasn't right. I had to attend countless education sessions in the NICU. I knew he could be late because he was born so early and he was so sick. Even as we settled into our new normal, I was holding on to hope that Gabriel would catch up. But deep down, I also knew we were heading towards a different path. 20 months later came the diagnosis, quadriplegia cerebral palsy. And that word really hit me hard. It forced me to reevaluate my values and to reimagine Gabriel's future and mine. The beginning was devastating and overwhelming. I had to learn to navigate the medical system, advocate for my son's needs, research therapies and treatments. In 2 years, we had several readmissions from respiratory infections, a few other diagnoses, and 187 appointments. I tried to do it all. Needless to say, I got exhausted physically, mentally, and emotionally, trying to be a mother to my older son, who was only 3 years old at the time, be the wife, the friend, the daughter to aging parents, the sister. So I came to my lesson number 2, ask for help. Understand that I didn't have to do it all alone. I found help for home. I started to build my village because community matters. Find people who shared the same challenges as me were my life savior. Peer support in person and online were key for me to understand that I was not alone. That's when I actually met Brenda, and she was the first person who actually sat down with me and shared her story and her life with her son. We talked for hours, and it was not about what she was saying. It was about who she was. I looked at her at that morning in a coffee shop. She had a smile on her face. She was living life. She was working. She gave me hope that life would still go on. And I wanted to be that person to someone else who would come after me. When we were living through loss and uncertainty, you don't think about purpose. You think about surviving the day. But over time, I realized something. My pain didn't have to be just mine to carry. It could be a bridge, a way to connect with others walking similar paths, a way to say, me too, I get it. I began volunteering in the very same NICU where we spent 146 days, just sitting with parents, holding space for their stories, their grief, and their hope. And I saw the power of being present, of showing up, of saying the hard things out loud. That's when I started to understand that sharing my story wasn't just healing for me. It helped others heal too. That's where I found my why, where I found meaning in this mess, where I knew that my son's journey and my own could be a lifeline for someone else, just like Brenda's had been for me. I realized that giving back gave me great joy. My volunteer days led me to the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, a parent-led organization providing support and education for families of premature babies. And CPBF for me isn't just a job, it's my heart. It's where I turned pain into purpose. Every project, every group, every research study with a parent's voice in it, that's where I feel most alive. At CPBF, we help families feel seen, heard, and supported. We advocate, we educate, we build bridges between healthcare providers and families, and we hold space for grief, joy, and everything in between. Giving back doesn't mean you have it all together. It means you've made it through something, and you're ready to reach a hand back. So that was my lesson number 3. Heal by helping. When I started supporting other families, I stopped feeling like I was drowning alone or feeling sorry for myself. I found connection, purpose, and strength I didn't know I had. But above all of it is the feeling of gratitude that gets me through the most difficult days and situations I face. And this is a feeling. And it really comes natural for me most of the time. But it also became a practice of changing perspectives. And people often ask me how I can feel grateful for going through difficulties. And my answer is, one day I was told by a doctor that I couldn't be a mom because I struggled with infertility for many years. And now I feel grateful that I have 2 living children and a little angel watching over me. I feel grateful that Gabriel was born and taken care in one of the best hospitals in the world that gave him a chance to live. I feel grateful that I found a job that fulfills my soul and make me believe that I can make a positive impact in the lives of the families that I serve. My heart is filled with gratitude when I have the opportunity to help others. And gratitude doesn't mean it's easy. It means we can still find beauty even in broken places. So this brings me to my next lesson. Find joy along the way. I came to the conclusion that we don't need much to find joy. We have to intentionally look for it. I find joy in the smallest things, from Gabriel's teenager attitude when he's really mad, now he calls me woman, or when he's singing in the car when you drive to therapy on Saturday mornings, or when I cook lunch with my older son. I don't wait for the perfect day, for the perfect vacation, for the perfect summer day. I try to find joy in the small things of everyday life. Even when the days are hard, when the days are painful, the days that we have to make difficult medical decisions. Because life is not about choosing between heartbreak and happiness. It's about holding them both. Our attitudes, our outlook in life determines how we carry on in our journeys. We are giving these children, these beautiful children with their medical complexities, their hard to understand diagnosis, and all the challenges that come with it. We need not only to take care of them, but also to advocate for services, funding, accessibility, inclusion, and it's a lot. So now I wish I could say it gets easier. The truth is the weight shifts, but it never fully goes away. 13 years later, and accumulated stress, PTSD from emergency rooms, broken relationships, mental exhaustion, all add up to how I feel and my ability to cope with everyday life. But as this father says in this beautiful book by Ann Douglas, if we stay open to the opportunities and invitations to learn and grow, we have the unique option of experiencing some good things we would never have experienced had we not been faced with the challenges brought to us by our child. And I really love this quote because it captures that within deep challenges lie powerful, unexpected gifts. For me, I didn't choose the hardships, as I'm sure none of you did, but I really chose how to respond to them with openness, resilience, and love. By saying yes to the invitations that came my way, whether that was sitting beside the NICU parent, volunteering, or lead the foundation, I create space not only for my own growth, but also for others to grow with me. Adversity broke me open in the best way possible, allowing me to see life with more clarity and live more intentionally. It is a reminder that purpose doesn't always come from joy. It often comes from pain that is transformed. So with time, I've learned that thriving doesn't mean having it all together. It means learning how to sustain yourself even when life is chaotic. Here's what I do now that I didn't know or prioritize before. So gratitude first, every single day. It is a practice for me. And it's not about pretending things are perfect, but about choosing to focus on what is still good, even in the hard seasons. So take your real breaks, not just scrolling on my phone. I really learned to unplug, whether it's half a day for me, a weekend mom camp, or sending the kids to camp, which is my favorite, so I can breathe. So I'm really learning how to prioritize rest and let go what I cannot control. There is a lot that I cannot fix. I've learned to save my energy to what really matters. And those are hard things to do for me. I delegate what doesn't need my hands. I used to feel that I had to do everything myself. And now I ask, does this really have to be me? If it's not, I delegate. So I'm learning to prioritize what feeds my soul, what makes me feel alive. So I love movies, so I make sure I go to the movies. I listen to music. I eat good food. I love food. I love traveling. And every time I can travel, I do. I love having deep conversations with friends. So I really seek out people who see life with light and possibility. And I learned that this is not being selfish. This is truly essential for me to survive. And the hardest one for me is to set boundaries with needy people, even people I love. My brother is important to me, but his negativity, he's constantly drains me. So I've learned to love him from a distance when it's needed. And the last one, but not the least, taking care of my own health that I neglected for many years because I was too tired to have one more appointment. But now in my age, I'm perimenopause, and this year it took me 2 wake-up calls to really remind myself that if I cannot take care of myself, I cannot take care of my son Gabriel. So I have to take care of my health as well. So just to wrap it up, I want to share with you that next time you see this perfect photo, when you scroll down your social media channels, remember that behind every smile is a story. And in that story, there is strength, love, heartbreak, and hope. And I want to thank Brenda for letting me share my story today. And this is actually Gabriel's Instagram feed with all his beautiful smiles, even in the days that he's in pain or he's in hospital, but he still finds a way to share that smile with me. So thank you.
Thank you. I always love to hear you present. And I think one of the things that always resonates with me is the need to surround ourselves with people who get it, first of all, but the people who can uplift. And I know that you and I will often talk a lot. I tend to be someone who doesn't always dwell on positive energy. I tend to be someone who spends time in that negative realm, not because I want to, but it's just what I do. And, every time you and I chat, you remind me about grateful. And I always say to you, Fabi, how do you stay, how do you stay positive? How do you stay grateful? And, but you do, and you do it in a truly authentic, meaningful way. And I know that it doesn't always come easy, but you've made that very, again, intentional, to find that way. And I think that has been a huge coping mechanism for you, has been this ability to continue to be grateful, and prioritize what's important. And I know that I learned from that. And I think it lends to the power of peers, right? Because everybody brings something different to the table and we get something different from one another. And I know that that's something that I get from you. And so I'm always grateful for that from you, because you are always the one who brings the positivity when I just can't seem to find that. And so thank you for that.
Thank you. Well, I just want to share something, because somebody asked Kate about when do you find time in your day, because you come to this, you learn a technique, and then you let go because you're so busy. And me too. But gratitude is one thing that when I wake up and I know I'm going to have a crazy day and I'm waking up already, Gabe screaming, Mom, because sometimes I pretend I don't hear right away. So I can have one more second in bed. But I always have these 3 things that I'm grateful for that day. And that's how I start my day. And I end my day on the same note, like what was grateful for that day. Because some days, most of the days are crazy, like it's busy. Things don't go your way, or you have to adapt or have to change schedules because the school called in the middle of your conference, then you have to go pick up your kid because the elevator is broken or he's not breathing for whatever reason. But at the end of the day, like what was right that day? At least the school called me when the elevator was broken, I was able to go. So find those little things that really help me to cope every single day, and find the people who help me, because there's always the helpers around. And that's where I bring this feeling of gratitude for me, because I cannot do too many things on the same day, too many techniques, even though I want to, but it's hard. Sometimes I just find it hard. So I have this one that keeps me going.
I love that. And thank you for reinforcing that and sharing that again, because I do think it is easy for us to become overwhelmed with all of those techniques that we talked about today that are very important, and something's going to work for someone. I always say you never know what's going to be the intervention that's going to work for you or stick with you. But if we can continue to reinforce these easier ideas that are free, that are available, that we can do in our own space, in our own time, that are unique to each of us. And, you know, obviously the piece about gratitude, and it does reframe our thinking. And I think it does help with our mental health. And so, you know, hearing you speak about it in practical terms, recognizing that sometimes it's difficult to find those things to be grateful for in that moment, but there's always a way to find them. Again, my person who sheds light, I'd be focusing on the broken elevator. You're grateful for the opportunity to go pick up your son. So I do think those are things. And thank you, Fabi, again, for always being transparent and sharing in your learnings and your experiences. I'm very grateful again for having you participate today. So thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to reiterate all of that. And for all of our speakers, Kate, Leslie, Jennifer, and Fabi, this was amazing. And, you know, from what you guys were just saying, I think too, you know, parents are all at different stages. So many of our speakers today have maybe come through some of the darkest days, and I'm sure each of you still have those darker days. And I just want to encourage every parent that's here to be gentle with yourself, because it's a process. And it's not linear. It's not the same for everyone. There's going to be good and bad days. And I, you know, hope everyone can take something from someone today to give them a little bit of light.
Thank you, everyone. We are conscious of time. Thank you, everyone, for spending time with us today. Fabi did also provide copies of her book. And so we did a draw on this in the background so that we didn't have to take up your time for that, but we will be giving those away as well. Again, a final thank you to everybody for our amazing presenters today. Who shared their insights, who shared their vulnerabilities with us, who you know, helped us connect on a different level. To everybody who participated today, who took the time, even for those who registered who couldn't make it, but I know that they want to hear the recording. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We hope to do this again. We hope you took something away from the day today, and we wish you the very best, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon. So thank you so much, everyone.